Chapter 3, Sea Truck. It still seems amazing that Jeremy Fry entrusted me with the task of developing and selling the Sea Truck. How well equipped was I as a designer and engineer? Jeremy was to teach me, without having to say anything, that every day is a form of education. My own education, in fact, owed as much to mentors like Jeremy and the open-mindedness of Hugh Casson at the RCA as it did to serendipity. When I set up on my own in my late 20s, I had to teach myself an awful lot about so many things before I made a success of my dual cyclone vacuum cleaner. You might say that if I'd studied science and engineering at school and university, I might have succeeded long before I did, much as I loved making things like model aeroplanes at home. But even though I went to a good school, excellent in sciences, engineering, maths and technology, my family history dictated an arts, indeed classics, education. It never occurred to anybody that engineering might be my thing. On my last day of term at the Royal College of Art, I drove down newly opened stretches of the M4 from London to Bath. It was time to start work. I was now the general manager for Rotork Marine, with a salary of £2,500, an Issigonis Morris 1100 as my company car, and a job to make and sell the Sea Truck. While I knew about making things, I felt I knew nothing about selling. Jeremy Fry, though, had done his charming best to convince me that I was the right man for the job. You know the Sea Truck inside out, every nut and bolt. You've made it. You're the best person to sell it. Which is what I did for the best part of the next 5 years. It seems remarkable to me, then, that this young man, dressed in floral shirts, flared trousers, and a purple raincoat from Just Men, should be making and selling high-speed landing craft to army brigadiers, seasoned construction executives. The word executive was all the rage in business circles, and on badges of new cars with fake leather seats seen dashing down the M4, and hardened oil company managers. You might well ask, as I did too, what was I doing making and selling rather than designing? I had, after all, spent the past 5 years training to be a designer. The theory I formed for myself was that I would be a much better equipped designer if I experienced the vicissitudes of manufacturing and the feedback of selling viscerally. There was, though, more to it than this. For half my time at the RCA, I had made up my mind that what I really wanted to be was a manufacturer. I wanted to make new things, things that might seem strange, not things you make because you know they will sell. The ultimate challenge, I suppose, was to design and make and sell inventive and wholly new products. To do this, you need to be more than a designer or engineer, no matter how well educated. You need control over the whole process, just as my exemplars, Sorkio Honda, André Citroën, and Akio Morita, creator of the Sony Walkman, had done. While my decision to work for Rotork Marine with the title General Manager might have appeared at the time to be a waste of my degree and a way of jettisoning a possibly golden future in the world of design, I had observed that designers work on what manufacturers and clients ask them to design, and this held no appeal. Rather grandly, I had decided I wanted to be the one developing the technology, engineering and design of a product, and making and marketing it too. How extremely fortunate I was to be able to discuss with Jeremy, a genius of a mentor, how our heroes like André Citroën had been able to design revolutionary new products and make a success of them. We also discussed how important design was in that success. Jeremy's friend Alec Issigonis and his revolutionary Mini featured too. Issigonis had produced a cult car that won rallies, a timeless product without obvious styling. These discussions impressed me so much that I was left with a burning ambition to emulate designers like Issigonis and Citroën in my own small way. I was even bold enough to declare to Jeremy that I would work with him for 5 years before setting off on my own. Even so, I was well aware that manufacturing, and perhaps even more so selling, were looked down on in Britain as grubby trades. These were the worlds of metal bashing and the oil rag on the one gnarled hand, and of the sharp-suited, smooth-talking, snake-oil spiv at the wheel of a Ford Cortina on the other. These netherworlds were clearly unsuited to sniffy middle-class graduates. This perception of the making of things as being somehow dirty and selling as unseemly underlined much of what was wrong with the British economy when I started work at the beginning of the 1970s. In some ways, precious little has changed. When people ask why companies, including Dyson, manufacture outside Britain, the answer might be complex. And yet, it boils down to the fact that there are places and countries around the world, from Germany to Singapore, where manufacturing is encouraged, and not least because it's seen as both worthwhile and exciting. There were several good reasons why, years later, I was to move Dyson manufacturing to Malaysia and ultimately its headquarters to Singapore. Yet the sheer enthusiasm for making things there, expressed by both governments and entrepreneurs, is a wonderful antidote to the British way of looking down on the world of factories and production. Inventions, though, no matter how ingenious and exciting, are of little use unless they can be translated through engineering and design into products that stimulate or meet a need and can sell. It might be fun to look at books illustrated with fascinating, if all too often enigmatic, impractical, and rather mad inventions of designs that never happened, yet even the most worthwhile and world-changing inventions, from ballpoint pens to the Harrier jump jet, need to be a part of the processes of making and selling to succeed. I happen to find factories and production lines romantic places. They are truly exciting. When we opened our vacuum cleaner factory in Chippenham, I worked on the production line for a fortnight, not just to understand the process and to check that it made good sense from a technical point of view, but because I enjoyed it. I like making things, and to be a good manufacturer, you really have to. There was, though, little romance in mainstream British manufacturing in the 1970s, an era of obstreperous communist shop stewards, lacklustre management, and poor quality manufacturing. Under life or death pressure, Britain had proved to be very good at making inventive machinery and products during the Second World War, yet somehow lost interest in peacetime. Perhaps the country was returning to pre-war form, where there had been all too little incentive to innovate during the years in which Britain has an easy time selling run-of-the-mill manufactured goods to its imperial territories. Covering a quarter of the globe, these were captive markets. As Britain's overseas reach declined, innovation and high-quality manufacture mattered very much indeed, yet there was precious little of it. Why was this? One reason, following a spate of innovation from the Industrial Revolution, is that the wealthy sons of what had been mostly artisans or lower to lower middle-class first-generation industrialists aspired to be gentry. The scions of industrial magnates were shipped off to public school, immersed in classical culture, and taught to hunt, fish and shoot, and to look down on the very world that allowed their ascendancy from makers to squires. Anything to do with politics, the military, the law, the established church, the arts, and above all, making money from money, with as little effort as possible, was good. Making anything by hand, and far worse, by machinery and factories, was very bad form indeed. Inventive and highly successful engineers from public school and officer-class backgrounds, like Sir Nigel Gresley, of record-breaking Flying Scotsman and Mallard fame, were as rare as British cars that didn't fall to bits in the 1970s. Imagine what Gresley's contemporaries and teachers at Marlborough College must have thought when this determined young man opted for an apprenticeship at Crewe Works with the London and North Western Railway, rather than a science degree at Cambridge. When I was at school, one of the worst things teachers could say to you, as some did to me, about a lack of academic progress was, "You'll end up working in a factory." Boys who struggled academically were exiled to the technical drawing shed. That was the culture. But think of the story of Paul Magès, inventor of self-levelling hydropneumatic suspension, around which the revolutionary Citroën DS of 1955 was designed and engineered. Magès' invention, developed for Citroën in secret in Nazi-occupied France during the Second World War, led on to oleo struts for aircraft, patented in the US in 1960, and to gas-filled shock absorbers, two unsung inventions that have made our lives safer and more comfortable than before, yet are taken wholly for granted. Magès joined Citroën in 1925 at the age of 17 as a very junior assistant. 12 years later, he had worked his way up to become a technical draftsman. It was this skill, in tandem with his questioning mind, that led to the new suspension technology that improved people's lives and the sales of Citroëns. The DS remained in production for the best part of 20 years, with sales reaching their peak in 1970, 15 years into its production run. Paul Magès, who also pioneered speed-sensitive steering with the Citroën SM, launched in 1970, was hardly a thicko. Magès did, though, work in Citroën's venerable Paris factory that by 1970 was markedly behind the times in terms of comfort and cleanliness. And yet, what could be less honourable and grubbier than making nothing? Not so much as a single oleo strut, other than money. And especially when this demands as little effort as possible, though all but guaranteeing social esteem. Britain has been a nation of plunderers and raiders, pirates, buccaneers and chancers for several hundred years. We have a history of the fast buck, celebrated in poetry, song, films and romantic histories, whereas the story of what has long been portrayed as the slow, difficult and dirty business of making things is held up to ridicule and shamed even today. The opening ceremony of the 2012 London Olympics was loved by the British, yet contained a running down of the ethos of British manufacturing industry, a celebration of how we had moved far from the labour-intensive satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution to the brave and squeaky clean new world of 21st century creative industries, of which the Olympic ceremony was testament. We are good at these things and should celebrate them, but not at the expense of other things like manufacturing. This smug sensibility served to reinforce the idea that industry, the engineering and making of things, was uncreative. And yet the Industrial Revolution took millions of people out of serfdom to give them homes and to create wealth for future generations. Instead of feeling shame, as the ceremony implied we should, we ought to feel pride and relief that our industrial might was able to produce the technology and equipment to repel the threats of two 20th century world wars. Rather ironically, BMW's much-visited factory in Munich sits next door to the city's Olympic Park. 15 minutes from the city centre, people from all over Germany come here to pick up their new cars from BMW Welt, a wildly inventive building designed by the Viennese architect Studio Himmelbau. When it was opened in 2007, members of the foreign press were puzzled by a colourful opening ceremony, during which the Cardinal Archbishop of Munich blessed the building as if it were a cathedral. Where the 2012 London Olympics pictured manufacturing as the lowest circle of hell, BMW likened it to godliness. And of course, in Germany, you may well be introduced to a crisply attired production engineer, Herr Professor Dr. Engineer, at some grand corporate do. His British equivalent, Barry or Dave, would not have been invited. I remember, for example, when Tony Blair, the energetic New Labour Prime Minister, began talking about the creative industries soon after he came to power at Westminster in 1997. He was referring to businesses and professions like publishing, advertising, architecture and design, and as if manufacturing was somehow not creative. And by the way, those esteemed professions and businesses are not industry. Manufacturing creates real products every day. That is creative, and it is industry. Perhaps this lack of interest in manufacturing has something to do with the fact that news is fast, while making things is extremely slow by comparison. It can take 5 years to launch a new Dyson product, and that is a very long time in the life of journalism, or, of course, banking or broking. Equally, there is no respectable profession of manufacturing, no long-established lobby group like the Royal Institute of British Architects or Institution of Civil Engineers. It is not by coincidence that the Institution of Civil Engineers, along with the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, have their Victorian London headquarters just a few minutes' walk from the Palace of Westminster. Manufacturers have no institute or imposing building near Parliament. With no organised representation, they fight their own corners individually. The people who run Britain have had little interest in manufacturing for a very long time. Ministers and members of Parliament only very rarely come from industrial or engineering backgrounds. Aside from an antipathy to long-term thinking and the discipline manufacturing demands, memories of industrial unrest and the incompetence of large-scale British manufacturers in the 1970s linger on. If manufacturing has long been seen, in Britain at least, as a lowly pursuit, then selling has surely been seen as beyond the pale, even though bankers and others working in seemingly respectable financial services are mostly salespeople by another name. Selling, though, goes with manufacturing as wheels do with a bicycle. It is far more than flogging second-hand cars or contraband wristwatches. Products do not walk off shelves and into people's homes. And when a product is entirely new, the art of selling is needed to explain it, what it is, how it works, why you might need it and want it. I happen to think that the Morris Minor was much the better car, and yet the way the Volkswagen Beetle was sold into the US market was very clever, with the Doyle Dane Bernbach ad agency playing on the fact that this curious car, created by Ferdinand Porsche for Adolf Hitler, was small, odd, and to American eyes, ugly. Press ads like Think Small and Lemon worked in an era from 1955 when most American cars were getting bigger, faster, and even more brash. In 1949, when the VW launched in the US market, just 2 cars were sold. Sales shot up following DDB's memorable ad campaigns, and by 1970, Americans had bought 570,000 VW Beetles, and DDB had increased its earnings tenfold. Unlike the Americans, the British rather despise salesmen and the art of selling. This is a pity. It can be noble and exciting work. Jeremy Fry taught me not to try to pressure people into buying, but to ask them lots of questions about what they did, how they worked, and what they might expect of a new product. Equally, I learned that most people don't really know exactly what they want, or if they do, is only from what they know, what is available, or what is possible at the time. As Henry Ford said famously, if he had asked American farmers what they wanted in terms of future transport, they would have answered faster horses. You need to show them new possibilities, new ideas and new products, and explain those as lucidly as possible. Dyson advertising focuses on how our products are engineered and how they work, rather than on gimmicks and snappy sales lines. Manufacturing itself is highly creative. It can turn left-field inventions into reliable, desirable products that sell. Jeremy Fry very much enjoyed thinking up new ways of doing things. This is how he made Rotork work in the first place, before creating a marine division in 1968. A member of the Fry chocolate manufacturing family, Jeremy had spent his meagre inheritance on Rotork, a small British engineering outfit he bought with his brother David in the early 50s. Rotork was soon producing motorised valve actuators, engineered and patented by Jeremy, for pipelines in the oil industry. It was an ingenious idea, a form of automation that was compelling to oil companies. Shell, BP and Esso were major customers, and from 1962, when Rotork took an order for 1,000 sealed, weatherproof and explosion-proof actuators for a new French uranium enrichment plant, to the nuclear power industry as well. I still find myself saying and putting into practice at Dyson some of the things Jeremy said and did when I worked for him half a century ago. As an inventor, engineer and entrepreneur, he believed in taking on young people with no experience, because this way he employed those with curious, unsullied and open minds, as long as they didn't sport beards or smoke pipes. He thought of beards as old-fashioned, harking back, I think, to the days of George V and Tsar Nicholas II. In any case, the 60s and the 70s were the age of Gillette and personal male grooming. A beard was widely considered to be unhygienic, while smoking a pipe was, or so Jeremy believed, a sign of smugness. Pipes have long died out, while beards and designer stubble have proliferated. Perhaps Jeremy would have changed with the times. He believed most of all in the power of enthusiasm. He sold new and intelligent things to people not through smooth and well-rehearsed sales patter, but because, aside from possessing charisma and charm, he enjoyed talking to prospective customers about engineering, for which his enthusiasm was infectious and second to none. As an instinctive inventor and engineer, Jeremy was always looking for a better way of doing things. He talked face-to-face to employees about new ideas. He never sent memos. Where there were opportunities, he didn't see problems. He was a natural teacher. When I told him I didn't know how to weld, he lit up a gas welding nozzle and taught me the rudiments in little more than 10 minutes. Being quick-minded, he expected the same of those he employed. He talked of the need to listen to your customers, aiming to improve products wherever necessary, and if you're an inventor, simply for improvement's sake. That is not to say we at Dyson ask our customers what they want and then build it. That type of focus group-led designing may work in the very short term, but not for long. Just before the launch of the minicar, Austin Morris did indeed consult a focus group, and nobody wanted this tiny car with its small wheels. So they cut the production lines down to one. When the public saw it on the streets, they were most enthusiastic for it, and Austin Morris never caught up with demand, missing out on serious profits. What was also undeniably special and important too, I think, was Jeremy's inimitable sense of style. Under Jeremy, Rotork was based initially at Widcombe Manor, the Grade 1 listed Georgian house he bought in 1954 at the time of his marriage. Treading a lively path between convention and experimentation, he installed a bath in his bedroom, covered the library floor with leather, and lined walls in copper. He was a close friend of Princess Margaret and the Earl of Snowdon, who stayed there often. Life at Widcombe was glamorous, and to the relish of the tabloid press sometimes a little too risque, too. This was not a part of Jeremy's life I knew, although I did admire and get to know some of his other friends, like Andy Garnett, who became a non-executive director at Dyson, and his brilliant wife, the writer Polly Devlin, and the opera director Robert Carson, a lifelong friend. Jeremy was a great engineer and an inspiring entrepreneur. He was always happier making things in the machine shop than he was sitting around a ballroom table or mingling with high society. He was interested in young people or anyone enthusiastic who wanted to learn. He loathed smugness and experts, by which he meant those who want you to believe they know everything about a subject, when the inventive mind knows instinctively that there are always further questions to be asked and new discoveries to be made. The sea truck was Jeremy's design, although when we first discussed it, when I was in my second year at the RCA, he said, "This boat of mine, no one wants it in wood. Would you like to do it in fiberglass?" I would, and did, despite knowing little, if anything, about the process. But what made the fiberglass sea truck special? It was light, rugged and fast. It was also flat-bottomed with side skegs. The skegs were sledge-type runners about 50 millimetres deep, running from the front to the back of the hull. They served as skids when the boat was put on the ground, but more importantly, they trapped bubbles underneath the boat, so that when it was planing at speeds above 12 miles per hour, the frictional resistance of the water was dramatically reduced, and it could plane at speeds of 40 knots and above, using less power than a conventional hull. The sea truck is the only craft where, once it planes, you can throttle back, a testament to the efficiency of the layer of bubbles it generates. Being flat-bottomed, it could negotiate shallow drafts and ride right up onto beaches. It had no need for jetties and piers. A low-cost modular workboat, cabins and other accessories could be added to the basic craft. The sea truck was stable at sea and without a keel sailed securely in shallow water. A little shorter and a bit wider than a Route Master bus, it could carry a pair of Minis or 2 Land Rovers and a heap of equipment, as experience taught me, from machine tools and cables to guns and ammunition. Initially, we sold 1 open boat a month. By 1974, I was making 200 a year with cabins and for clients in 40 countries. An invention capable of change and adaptation, there was always, it seemed to me, a way of making and selling a better sea truck. Through the sea truck adventure, I learnt, on the ground, and in this case on water too, how selling and manufacturing are very much two sides of the same coin. I travelled the world, appointing agents as I went. I sold sea trucks in Norway to lay underwater phone lines, sea trucks to many foreign armies and navies, sea trucks as passenger ferries, and sea trucks to the Egyptian Special Boat Brigade, who, excited by their low profile, they were hard to hit with gunfire, used them to storm Sinai during the Yom Kippur War. I also sold sea trucks to the Israelis. With its bow flap lowered in seconds, commandos could sprint out onto landing grounds. The Royal Navy said it would buy sea trucks if they could be armour-plated, but this would have weighed them down and lost the boats their advantage of stealth and speed. We did, though, meet the Royal Navy's requirements with sea trucks commissioned to ferry stores and personnel and to recover torpedoes. We built a sea truck for the London Fire Brigade, a rapid response tender complete with fire pumps and ancillary equipment. It could tear up the Thames faster than river police boats. With a certain weight limit, the sea truck, highly manoeuvrable in shallow water, made a good tug. As well as pulling, it was also good at pushing. Demonstrated to the Army, the sea truck proved itself capable of pushing section of bridges weighing 45 tons. We also sold one to the University of Southern Florida for work as a marine laboratory, another to South Africa to destroy invasive water hyacinths. The Royal Yacht Britannia bought a royal blue sea truck with a red carpet to furl out across the ramp. Her Majesty the Queen used it on visits to far-flung parts of the Commonwealth, such as the Gilbert and Ellice Islands in the Western Pacific. The sea truck was at its best, perhaps, in the months following the terrible floods that smothered much of East Pakistan in the wave of the Bhola cyclone, which smashed across the Bay of Bengal in November 1970. Bhola is said to have been responsible for up to 500,000 deaths. Widespread criticism of the government of West Pakistan for failing to respond to this disaster led to the Bangladesh Civil War, or the Liberation War. On its way to becoming the independent Republic of Bangladesh, East Pakistan suffered horribly from atrocities committed by West Pakistani armed forces. Floods, hunger, streams of refugees, and the sheer horror of the situation led to fundraising events in the West, most famously the Concert for Bangladesh, organised by George Harrison in New York's Madison Square Garden, and on Rotork's part, the dispatch of 100 sea trucks to Bangladesh. Jeremy spent several months there managing our service depot and supervising the distribution of supplies. A true Jack and Jill of all trades, the sea truck was part of an unofficial School of Engineering and low-key design that includes the Land Rover, a machine that so often went wheels on deck with the sea truck, the Swiss Army penknife, the Citroën de Chevaux, the Bell 47 helicopter, and Alec Issigonis' Mini. What I like so much about these machines, and my affection for them remains undimmed, is their ingenuity and the fact that the power of invention invested in them made for designs that reimagined and revolutionized their market sectors and even created whole new markets. And yet, for all their functionality, each is a highly individual product with a character and charm of its own. What is equally interesting is that these radical machines made use of pre-existing ideas and components. With the Mini, for example, the features that made it so revolutionary had been tried at various times beforehand. Before the Mini, which made its debut in 1959, there had been other cars with transverse engines, notably the Saab 92 in 1947, a wind-cheating, rallying-winning saloon engineered by a small team led by Gunnar Lundström, an aero engineer and keen sailor, and stylist Sixten Sassen, a former Swedish Air Force pilot and designer of Saab military aircraft. In fact, the transverse car engine dates back to 1899 and the Critchley light car made by Daimler in Coventry. There had been cars in the mid-1930s also with front-wheel drive, like the Citroën Traction Avant, engineered and styled by André Lefebvre and Flaminio Bertoni, to whom we owe the De Chevaux. There had been boxy cars, making as much room as possible for driver and passengers, and there had been forms of rubber suspension too. Issigonis brought these ideas together in a tiny car that despite its very modest dimensions, just 10 foot long and 4.5 feet wide, could seat 4 adults and their bags and drive like a go-kart. The whole 80% of the Mini was given over to its occupants. Isigonis was particularly pleased with the big, bin-like door pockets. The bins, he said, held 27 bottles of Gordon's gin and 1 of vermouth, his tipple. Like the Sea-Truck, the Mini led many lives in its 40-year production run. It was a family saloon, a car for stars of the stage and screen and recording studios. It was a tiny estate car. My mother also owned one when I was a schoolboy at Gresham's. A Monte Carlo rally winner, storming up icy alpine passes in snow, much to the consternation of the French judges, who tried very hard to find reasons to ban these English terriers, and a racing car capable of taking on and beating fearsome twin-cam 3.8-litre Mark II Jaguars at Goodwood in the early 60s. The Mini was a delivery van, a pickup truck, a post van, a fashion statement, and even a police patrol car. Although I never met Alec Isigonis, of course I wish I had, he was a close friend of Jeremy Fry, and the pair raced minuscule, lightweight, hill-climbing cars together with John Cooper, who famously made the Mini into a fast track and rally car. With fellow engineer George Dowson, Isigonis had developed a tiny monocoque, or stress skin, aluminium and plywood-framed, 750cc hill-climbing racer in the 1930s, culminating in a lithe, minimalist car as light on its wheels on the ground as a fly on its legs on water. It featured rubber rather than conventional steel suspension. It enjoyed a successful career. For the Mini, Isigonis had wanted to use a form of interconnected suspension, improving on that of the soft-sprung Citroën 2 Chevaux, a car that leaned alarmingly, if safely, around bends. For reasons of technical and financial expediency, the first Minis were fitted with rubber cone rather than interconnected suspension. Isigonis' friend Alex Moulton, another innovative engineer who lived near Bath and was also a friend of Jeremy Fry, devised the Mini's rubber suspension. The cones were fitted between the car body and the axles adjacent to the wheel. They softened the impact of rough roads, with the rubber cone partially collapsing under load in the same way that a spring compresses. More significantly, Moulton invented the hydroelastic suspension system that made my Rotork Company Morris 1100 such a comfortable and reassuring car, despite its modest size, to drive up and down the M4 to and from Bath. This was a similar interconnected suspension to that used by Citroën in the groundbreaking DS model of 1955. The idea was that interconnecting the suspension between the wheels allowed suspension at other wheels to assist when one wheel was deflected. The system also aided cornering by spreading loads to all wheels. Alex Moulton's family were in the rubber business. His father, John Coney Moulton, an army officer who served in India and Singapore during the First World War, had gone on to direct the Raffles Museum in Singapore. An expert in Southeast Asian cicadas, he was on leave at home in Bradford-on-Avon when serving as Chief Secretary to Charles Viner Brooke, the last White Rajah of Sarawak, when he fell ill with appendicitis and died. Alex was 6 at the time. I got to know him quite well through Jeremy Fry. Curiously, given my own situation, Alec Isigonis' father had died early. He was 15 at the time, as had Jeremy's while he was at Gordonston. The three of them had very different characters, despite their overlapping career paths, but all three shared an independence of mind, a hard work ethic, and a drive to succeed. Mechanically gifted, Alex Moulton had built a steam car while at school in Marlborough. After reading mechanical sciences at Cambridge, he was apprenticed to the Bristol Aircraft Company. Like Alec Isigonis, Jeremy Fry, and Buckminster Fuller, he sought lightness in everything he made, along with an efficient use of materials. Just as Jeremy made a better valve actuator, and Isigonis a better small family saloon, when the alternative was a bubble car, Alex wanted to create a better bicycle. Impeccably dressed as always, he set to work devising one in the stable yard of his Jacobean house. Launched in 1962, his famous Moulton bike, with its compact lightweight frame, small 16-inch wheels and rubber suspension, proved to be truly revolutionary. It made cycling, especially in town, fashionable all over again. The Mini of the cycling world, it was the darling of fashion editors, featuring in numerous photo shoots in Sunday supplements and magazines like Vogue throughout the 60s. It turned ideas about what exactly a bicycle, or any other product, ought to be on its head. As the critic Rainer Banham wrote in the Architectural Review, bicycle thinking can never be the same again, and there can be no more nonsense about permanent and definitive forms, for even the Moulton is capable of improvement. The Moulton was also an excellent bike to ride. It remains in production. I own a wonderful, extra lightweight pylon space frame model. Although several companies have cribbed the wheel size and foldability of the Moulton, none have come close to matching its pure and refined engineering. Neither have they bothered with the suspension necessary to smooth out the bumps created by small wheels, or the high tyre pressure needed to achieve minimum rolling resistance. The toolkit is a single Allen key, slid into a socket under the comfortable saddle. Something I ought to have learned from Alex Moulton during my Rotork years, though, was the story of how he'd first thought of getting an established bike company to manufacture his radical new design. In 1966, Raleigh brought out a bad copy that hit the sales of the Moulton original. Moulton sold out to Raleigh the following year, with Alex retained as a consultant. It was not an easy partnership. When sales slumped in the early 70s, Alex reacquired rights to his design and began manufacturing the bike and versions of it on his own at Bradford-on-Avon. Alex's story reminds me of how important it is for inventors to keep hold of their patents and rights to their designs, and if possible, to run their own show. The other thing I was learning was that invention might be a brilliant idea, yet either unsuited or irrelevant to the market it needs to sell in. A design might be considered ahead of its time, and sometimes, because of this, even ridiculous. The hugely successful Sony Walkman was dismissed when it was first launched, because who could possibly want a tape recorder that couldn't record? And it was received knowledge, until Volkswagen and later Honda crossed the Atlantic with the Beetle and the Accord, that the Americans were wedded resolutely to big cars. Alec Issigonis was a genius of sorts who knew how small cars could be big. He was also an independently minded man who was never going to be able to fit comfortably into the giant, staid and highly bureaucratic British Leyland conglomerate that in 1968 swallowed BMC, the owner of marques like Austin and Morris, who made the first Minis. Aside from anything else, Alec's view that market research is bunk and that one should never copy the opposition was hardly like to appeal to his new boss, the hard-nosed lorry salesman Donald Stokes, who replaced the much-loved Morris Minor with the hapless market research Morris Marina and smothered the roofs of lithe Jaguars in vinyl. The best-selling British car of all time is the Mini. If market research had ruled Issigonis' roost at BMC, it would never have existed. Inevitably, Alec Issigonis was sidelined. A thorn in British Leyland's tough hide, he was, however, feted by fellow engineers, being made a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1967. I was given an original Morris Mini Minor by Dyson engineers for my 60th birthday. It's kept at the Dyson campus in Malmesbury. It's been sectioned lengthways, so its interiors and workings, from the transverse engine, rubber suspension, weight-saving sliding windows, and those big door bins, are on display. It's an everyday reminder of how ingenious engineering design can be. The Mini is also a reminder of how a radical product can work its way into the manufacturing heart of an established company and succeed to the tune of 5 million sales over a 40-year production run. It was a left-field design that, if never ordinary, became part of everyday life. The Sony Walkman is another fascinating success story, because at first its design appears to defy common sense. Launched on 1st of July 1979, in time for school and college holidays, this personal cassette player that allowed people on the move to listen to music through headphones was hugely popular from day one. Priced at $150, the compact silver and blue Walkman wasn't cheap. While within Sony itself it was controversial and brave because it was unable to record, and no one had made a tape recorder that wouldn't do so before. Nevertheless, Sony's Masaru Ibuka, one of the Japanese company's founders, hoped to sell 5,000 Walkmans a month. He sold 50,000 in the first 2 months. By the time production ended in Japan in 2010, more than 400 million had been sold worldwide. Sony had come up with the right product at the right time. A discreet music player for people taking up jogging or wanting to study or relax at home or while travelling, without bothering others and listening to the music of their choice. Cleverly, Ibuka had asked his deputy Nori Oga, a physicist and musician who had trained under Herbert von Karajan in Munich, to design a stereo playback-only version of existing cassette recorders like the Sony Pressman. Using off-the-shelf components where possible, in 1978 Oga and his team produced the TC-45, but priced it $1,000 and in Ibuka's mind too bulky. He tried it on business flights where he liked to listen to opera. It was a case of back to the drawing board. With lightweight foam headphones and no function other than playback, the Walkman emerged. The press lampooned it. Even the name was ridiculous. The Japanese press were wrong, although the market hadn't known it wanted a tiny personal stereo. When it saw the attractive little device and heard it in action, it fell in love with it. By the mid-1980s, the word had entered the Oxford English Dictionary. The Walkman was a cultural phenomenon, while for Sony, it was also easy to manufacture. And then there is the story of Citroën and its inventive and highly distinctive cars, from the front-wheel drive traction avant of the 1930s and the minimalist deux chevaux of the 1940s to the technologically advanced DS of the 1950s. Under the direction of the highly decorated former military aviator and Michelin director Pierre-Jules Boulanger, Citroën drove its engineering and design department energetically towards radical design. Boulanger nurtured a remarkable team. Chief among them were André Lefebvre, a former racing car designer and driver, in charge of engineering design, and Flaminio Bertoni, an Italian sculptor who gave these unmistakably Gallic cars their distinctive styling. As part of Michelin, since its first bankruptcy in 1934, Citroën developed radial tyres in tandem with Paul Mages's self-levelling suspension for the DS. What Citroën proved with these cars, as indeed Alec is against with the Mini, is that a large public is not afraid to buy highly advanced products. Famously, Citroën took 12,000 orders for the DS on the day it was unveiled at the 1955 Paris Motor Show. Even so, Citroën was to make a key commercial mistake. Between 1955 and 1970, the company launched no new models. It had been resting on its laurels. And then, realizing the car-buying public was looking for something new, it appeared to panic, investing in launching a host of new cars. The expense bankrupted the company. Taken over by Peugeot in 1974, it was never the same again, making money, yet losing its character and its drive for innovative design, engineering and styling. There is a lesson here. Rather like the way some sharks have to keep moving to stay alive, innovative engineering-led manufacturers need continuous innovation to stay competitive. Striving for new and better products is often what defines such companies. At Dyson, we never stand still. In a quarter of a century, we've gone from making a revolutionary vacuum cleaner to prototypes of a radical electric car. Invention tends to compound invention, and companies need to be set up for this. They can have a déesse moment. Déesse is the French for goddess. A prolonged one in the case of the car that, in Roland Barthes' words, had fallen from the sky, and still fail. In Britain, though, one of the most revolutionary of all technological inventions, the jet engine, had a rather rocky and painful slow gestation. It was the invention of another one of my heroes, Frank Whittle, whose sheer determination and perseverance have inspired me ever since I first set up on my own as a manufacturer. Those working at Dyson's Malmesbury campus are reminded every day of Whittle's achievement. We have the world's oldest working jet engine in one of our workspaces. It is also one of the very first put into production. We fire it up in the car park. This particular engine, a Rolls-Royce RB23 Welland, was assembled at Barnslwick, then in the West Riding of Yorkshire, in December 1943. We discovered its Rolls-Royce ancestry at the time I wanted to take it to the Goodwood revival, but was unable to do so because we found a fuel leak. A set of Whittle's drawings for the fuel system showed ours was not one of Whittle's original engines, but a version made by Rolls-Royce. Our enthusiastic engineers rebuilt it according to Whittle's own drawings. It now works perfectly. The point, though, is that this is the forerunner of engines that in recent years have powered more than 3 billion passengers a year around the world. A part of what makes the Welland so special is that as a turbojet, it has very few moving parts, in contrast with the Rolls-Royce Merlin piston engine, powering Spitfires and Lancasters, that preceded it. In fact, Whittle's first formula for a jet engine, written and drawn by him in a school-style exercise book in 1929, when he was 22, is as simple as ABC. He wanted an engine that could power a passenger plane across the Atlantic at 50,000 feet and 500 miles an hour. If the Whittle jet had been developed apace, by 1939 the RAF may well have had a range of jet fighters and bombers that would have been a very serious challenge not just to the Luftwaffe, but to Hitler's military ambitions as a whole. The tragedy, as is well known, is that the Germans were able to catch up and put jet aircraft into production before the British. The double tragedy is that German engineers were able to study Whittle's design freely. In 1935, the Air Ministry refused to pay the £5 needed to renew his patent. And even before then, Whittle's proposal was free for anyone to study, as believing it to be of little consequence, the Air Ministry had not included it in its top-secret list. Against the odds, Whittle succeeded. A working-class boy from Coventry, with a passion for flight and for making model aircraft, in 1923 Whittle was apprenticed to the RAF as a metal aircraft rigger. He was one of just 5 RAF apprentices chosen to fly as officer cadets. Whittle was an excellent, indeed daredevil pilot. Recognising his exceptional intelligence, the RAF saw him through Cambridge and a first-class degree in 2 years instead of 3 in mechanical sciences, while at the same time building the world's first jet engine through the Powerjets Company. Powerjets was generously and bravely financed by Maurice Bonham Carter, grandfather of Helena Bonham Carter. It is a matter of disgrace that the government stole the Whittle jet from his company without compensation and not even allowing Powerjets to compete in its manufacture. Both the Air Ministry and its experts and manufacturing companies had been sceptical of Whittle's jet. A trickle of funding saw the engine come alive in a rudimentary industrial building in Rugby in March 1937. This was the moment when the Air Ministry gave the project the thumbs up, although it was really only when the Germans flew their first jet aircraft, the Heinkel 178, days before the invasion of Poland, that the vital importance of Whittle's work was fully recognised. With Rover working on the engine and Gloucester aircraft on the airframe, Whittle's prototype jet took to the air in May 1941. "It just sucks itself along like a hoover," said one RAF pilot to another when asked how the E-28/39 flew without a propeller. "Give me 1,000 Whittles," boomed Winston Churchill. But the production aircraft, with Rolls-Royce-built engines, that Whittle was working on with Gloucester was not the E-28/39, a prototype, but the twin-engine Meteor fighter that entered service in July 1944. The jet age had truly begun, and especially so when a Whittle engine was shipped to the US, where it spawned the first American turbojet, General Electric's GE J-31. And then, 2 years after the war ended, Britain's Labour government sold 55 Rolls-Royce Nenes, a development of Whittle's first-generation jet, to its friends in the Soviet Union for non-military use. "What fool will sell us his secrets?" Stalin asked. The Nene was quickly reverse-engineered by Vladimir Klimov into the VK-5A for what became the highly effective swept-wing MiG-15 fighter US pilots came up against in the Korean War. Today, we need a great degree of secrecy and security to protect our research and inventions. It seems extraordinary that one of the most important of all modern inventions should have been handed on a plate to our Cold War enemies. But that's politicians for you. It also demonstrates how little value they place on home-developed technology and the investment required by companies to achieve it. If Whittle had been an engineer with Rolls-Royce from the outset, rather than a maverick RAF officer working on the fringes of manufacturing industry, might his jet have been given a smoother, faster flight through development and production? Perhaps. In any case, when I decided to make my own bagless dual-cyclone vacuum cleaner, I learned, after a number of false starts, especially in trying to get existing manufacturers to take it on, that the best thing for me was to go my own way and build my own factory. This, as you might expect, was not especially easy. When I started out on my own, factories in Britain were only available on 21-year leases, at a time when inflation and interest rates were very high indeed. And even when you are established and need extra manufacturing capacity quickly, the procedures and politics of planning permission and so on can threaten to drag you down, or, of course, prompt you to set up elsewhere in the world where decisions are taken quickly and effectively. Once you have a factory, how are you going to make your inventive new product? Are you going to make plastic components yourself or buy them in? And what about motors and gaskets and 100 other parts that one way or the other you have to will into being? Ideally, a manufacturer, Dyson certainly, should aim to source as little as possible from outside the company. Those of us who drove British cars made in the 1970s know pretty much exactly why. Poor assembly aside, what often let these cars down were components sourced from poor quality external suppliers. Electrical failures were legion. Electric motors, spinning reliably at phenomenal speed, are at the heart of Dyson products. Nobody made anything other than an ordinary motor, so we developed our radically new technology that we made ourselves. This is an expensive thing to do, but it allowed us to revolutionize vacuums. Obviously at Dyson we cannot make absolutely everything on our own, but we can work with suppliers so that they're in tune with us, with our manufacturing standards and our values. Because what we're doing is special and different, we can't go to a company like Foxconn, for example, which founded in 1974 and employing over 800,000 people in different parts of the world, makes well-known American, Canadian, Chinese, Finnish and Japanese electronic products. These products are mostly made from off-the-shelf components. We design our own components. We don't buy them off the shelf. In 1974, I was at a personal crossroads. Life was certainly exciting. Although caught up in my work for Rotork, I was also a father. Our daughter Emily was born in 1971, and our first son Jake 2 years later. Deirdre and I had bought an old stone Cotswold farmhouse that meant the end of my long-distance commuting, and the beginning of a lot of hard physical work that helped spark my idea for an invention of my own, designed to make everyday life better. Better, that is, for someone like me restoring a house and having to negotiate paths and muddy tracks with a wheelbarrow that was difficult to steer when loaded and had a tendency to topple on its side. Surely it must be possible to invent a better wheelbarrow. While Jeremy and Rotork made me think of products that operated like the sea truck on a big outdoor stage, capital goods like aircraft or excavators or working boats bought by people with plenty of capital, family life helped focus my mind on those that might make some of the simple trials of everyday domesticity that much easier than they were, and even perhaps enjoyable. It wasn't that I didn't revel in the idea of designing for oil companies and armies, But now I had become interested in designing products for everyday use, designs derived from my own experience. With capital goods, you have to interpret what industries want in terms of the performance of their service. A quite different proposition from what we want at home, where we are also the user. This is important because, as a potential customer, unlike with capital goods, you can make the judgment about whether or not you would venture to buy this revolutionary and strange product. What this means is that it is very much riskier to design a revolutionary new and perhaps strange product for someone else or someone whose business you do not know. You are dependent on interpreting what they say and what they might need, and you might be wrong. If, however, you are designing a product that you use yourself, you understand what you need from it. If your new product is radically different and works in a different way, you can use your own feelings and interpretation of the product to decide if it is something that would appeal to you enough to want to buy it. It is easier and safer to take a big risk with a product if it is one you would use yourself. I did, though, have another boat in the pipeline. During my years at Rotork, I spent creative and very enjoyable months at Le Grand Bon, Jeremy's research centre. This was the remote Provençal hamlet that, abandoned during the First World War, Jeremy had bought in the early 60s and restored with the help of students from the Architectural Association. The setting, above fields of lavender in the Luberon Valley, with the Mediterranean in the distance, was and remains exquisite. This was to be the natural stage set for Claude Berry's captivating films Jean de Florette and Manon des Sources, made back-to-back in the mid-80s. It was a wonderful place to think. One of these thoughts was for a boat made out of polyethylene pipes that we saw along local roads during the installation of gas mains. These pipes were very hard to break, unlike the fiberglass hulls of sea trucks landing on rocky shores at high speeds in the hands of overzealous owners. And even if a pipe were damaged on a tube boat, it could be replaced. We would have 8 or 10 pipes lashed together, rather like Thor Heyerdahl's raft Kon-Tiki that caught the global imagination when the Norwegian explorer crossed the Pacific in 1947 from South America to the Polynesian islands. Where, though Heyerdahl used balsa logs, native to South America, I worked with thermoplastic. What the two materials, natural and man-made, have in common is that both are lightweight and durable. The tube boat would be much cheaper than a sea truck. I started making models and testing these on a local reservoir in the Basses Alps. Sadly, the tube boat never made it into production. Rotork itself had started to lose interest in the sea truck venture from 1975, as Jeremy removed himself from the business. But at least one aspect of the tube boat's design wasn't wasted. To seal the ends of the polythene tubes, I used footballs. In practice, these would have been moulded spheres. What with my frustration with cantankerous wheelbarrows, the ball at the end of the tube boat tubes was beginning to give me an idea. This was the ball barrow. I hadn't thought of the name yet, but as I sat on a stone wall at Le Grand Bon, overlooking the Provençal countryside as its lyrical best, I felt impelled, no matter how much I liked and respected Jeremy and enjoyed working with him, to go my own way. Typically, Jeremy generously offered to back my new venture. This was an offer I dearly wish I had taken up. In 1974, with 2 young children, a substantial overdraft and a whopping mortgage, I stepped out of an exciting job, a company directorship and a salary, and into the unknown. Deirdre and I had rolled the dice in our minds. As always, her support and guidance were all important. She said we could bet on my inventive streak, and so we did. For me, though, risk has long been an antidote to inertia. I felt that then. As an artist, Deirdre appreciated what a project or idea was about. It's something you get caught up in. You have to do it, believe in it, and trust in a successful outcome. I was very lucky that Deirdre understood and allowed me the rein to plunge into the unknown, a world of debt, risk, and potential penury. Back then, there were no incentives to start a business on your own, while venture capital was non-existent. This was long before Silicon Valley startups. Indeed, it was quite the opposite, with investors earning big money from interest on their capital and unwilling to risk it on manufacturing. Against the grain, though, I was going to be a manufacturer. I was also going to be something else, and someone I believe is key to successful invention. I was going to be an entrepreneur. Chapter 2. Art School. While my friends were going off on gap years before university, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My gap year proved to be a year spent at art school to see how it suited me. In the autumn of 1965, I rode down to Kensington on my Honda 50 to join the foundation year course at the Byam Shaw School of Drawing and Painting. It was all very exciting, not least because I was now self-reliant. I had no one to turn to in London. I needed to find my own home and make my own way. Equally, I was free of restrictions, with a bedsit in Herne Hill in Victorian southeast London suburbia and a motorcycle to get around on. Perhaps I should have thought a little more than I did at the time about my little Honda. Launched in 1958, the Honda 50, or Super Cub as the Japanese know it, is the most produced motor vehicle ever. In 2017, Honda assembled the 100 millionth Super Cub in one of its 15 international production plants. The invention of the engineer Soichiro Honda, who I admire greatly for his addiction to the continuous improvement of products, and salesman Takeo Fujisawa, the Super Cub was simplicity itself to own and ride. Clean too, with its enclosed drivetrain, plastic bodywork and leg guards, and nippy with its tiny 49cc four-stroke engine producing 4.5 brake horsepower at a fast-spinning 9,500 RPM. This was an early example of an inventive manufacturer taking an existing product, in this case the low-cost motorcycle, and transforming it into a much better and much more attractive proposition than anything available at the time. Soichiro Honda and Takeo Fujisawa's genius was to think against the grain while focusing on continuous improvement. They also subcontracted basic components while focusing their efforts on inventing and manufacturing in-house those that were not available elsewhere. Honda made in-house, for example, its own more efficient gearbox. The company continues to invest a sizable chunk of its income into research and development, aiming for constant improvement and innovation. I was lucky to be taught at Byam Shaw by the op-art artists Bridget Riley and Peter Sedgley, who taught colour and the relationship between colours. While learning to innovate, we were taught to draw well. For me, drawing remains a fundamental and essential skill. What was equally important for me, though, was that I was fortunate enough to be taught under the studious eye of the school's principal, Maurice de Sausmarez. Maurice would have been in his early 50s then. A fine painter in his own right, he was an intellectual with the ability to discuss complex ideas in a clear, straightforward language. He never spoke in art world or any other jargon. He published a number of highly perceptive interviews with artists Peter Sedgley, Naam Garbo, Bridget Riley, Ben Nicholson and Henry Moore, encouraging these talented artists to think clearly as they spoke with him. Painting aside, his passion was education, and he was very good at it. His special genius was an uncanny and unerring ability to understand what a particular student was good at, even if they themselves had no idea. He encouraged us to believe that innate talent, when backed by natural enthusiasm, will shine through if only the right doors are opened. This is something I've certainly never forgotten. When I reached the end of my year at Byam Shaw, Maurice sat me down and suggested that I might be interested in doing design. "What's that?" I asked. The Byam Shaw had only offered drawing and painting. This was 1965, and design was not covered by magazines or newspapers, and was certainly not available in shops. Perhaps the immediate post-war public felt grateful to buy anything, and design was not a consideration. The Design Centre in Haymarket was the only exhibition space showing good design, although its efforts had not yet reached me in Kensington, engrossed as I was in fine art. Morris explained, "There is fashion design, industrial design, furniture design." I stopped him there. At least I knew what chairs were. "You can shape and make your own chairs," Morris suggested. "Furniture design, then?" I had to think about this. I'd wanted to be a painter, and I thought that's what artists did. But I also knew that I liked making things. And because I'd sat on chairs that I'd broken and then mended, then maybe I could design them too. A better chair, perhaps. Morris, who had studied there himself before the war, knew that the Royal College of Art, a wholly postgraduate college, was conducting an experiment by taking 3 students without first degrees to see how they compared. I applied, sat the exam, was interviewed, although possessing a scant knowledge of furniture woods, and was thrilled to be accepted, along with someone who had also switched disciplines, the sculptor Richard Wentworth and Charles Dillon. Charles embarked on some original designs such as the kite light, a cloth kite hanging from ceilings with a lamp suspended inside, a project he worked on with his wife Jane, a fellow Royal College of Art, RCA, graduate, before his tragic and early death. There was a condition to bypassing a first degree. I would have to spend 4 years of study instead of the normal 3, although this was not exactly a hard condition to accept. Thrilling though this opportunity was, it was dwarfed by a coup de foudre. I had fallen in love, and have remained so for more than 50 years. Deirdre was the most naturally beautiful girl in her 60s garb, often from Bieber. She was modest, yet incredibly talented, a far better painter at the I am sure than I. She is quite the warmest human being I've ever met, with an undying curiosity and enthusiasm for life. Her instinctive understanding of the emotions of others is uncanny and utterly endearing. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. How did all this happen? At the Byam Shore, we made field trips to draw at various interesting places around central London. Dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum, people walking in London parks, dancers at the Ballet Rambert, and ice skaters at the Queen's Ice Rink in Bayswater. Have you ever tried drawing spinning skaters? I managed to tag along with Deirdre among our group on some of these outings, chatting ceaselessly when not working. Luck was on my side. We both travelled in from south-east London and sometimes met on London Underground's Circle Line. Not the most romantic of places, perhaps, yet it provided another chance to talk. Things came to a spontaneous head outside the monkey cage on a drawing visit to the London Zoo. I dared to hold Deirdre's hand. Unlike the monkey whose hand I'd just grabbed, she didn't snatch it away, although she claims that she was truly shocked. Our first date had me driving the replacement for the Honda 50, an ancient starterless Morris Oxford, all the way to the charming Ark restaurant in Notting Hill. It's still there and still looks like an ark, although it is now called The Shed. The evening seemed to be a success, and many more followed. Deirdre was her understanding self to put up with someone who was little more than an immature public schoolboy. My mother was shocked that I'd fallen in love so young, but quickly came to adore Deirdre. Although we were both living on grants in 1967, we decided to marry. This may now seem somewhat premature, but 5 years at university is a long time, and we couldn't wait. In the 60s, everybody was less worried about job security. Neither of us had a job anyway, and we had no thoughts about buying a house. We were far too poor, and as married life is tough on a grant, we both took part-time jobs to buy food and pay the rent. We ran up a huge overdraft that got ever bigger through our married life until it had risen to the astronomical level of £10,000, the equivalent of £50,000 today. It was only paid off when I was 48, by which time it had reached £650,000. I like to think that prodigious borrowing is putting money to good use. Deirdre has had the most creative of lives while nurturing 3 loving and talented children, Emily, Jake and Sam. Fortunately, they have inherited her extraordinary emotional intelligence and humanity. All 3 have pursued artistic careers, Emily as a fashion designer, Jake as a designer and Sam as a musician, a talent he has inherited from Deirdre. Early on, Deirdre used to do illustrations for Vogue of clothes or goods selected for its Shop Hound page, and she has continuously painted and exhibited throughout our married life. She has a distinctive style that is hers alone. Her paintings are of many subjects on a large scale, beautifully drawn and with exquisite use of colour. I only wish Deirdre had kept more of the paintings she has sold. Her second career as a bespoke rug designer and supplier from her Kings Road gallery, with a showroom in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, illustrates her mastery of colour, as you can see in her book Walking on Art. World of Interiors credits her as Britain's leading carpet designer. And to live with such a creative partner, to walk in bare feet on her artistic silk rugs, to gaze at her paintings on the wall, to be surrounded by her subtle wall colours, makes me the most fortunate of men. And I haven't mentioned her opera singing. Until quite recently, Deirdre's had to put up with a perpetual lack of funds. She made clothes for herself and sometimes for our children. To save money, we grew our own vegetables long before it was green to do so. Craziest of all, during our first 30 years of marriage, she agreed unselfishly, and so typically of her, to keep putting her signature to endless bank guarantee forms in front of solicitors, signing away all our possessions. If we had defaulted on the bank loans, we would have been evicted from our home. She has a mild countenance and manner, but is not one to give in or give up. Deirdre's background was rather different from mine. She was born and grew up in Bell Green, Lower Sydenham, a South London suburb, she says, of neat semis and orderly commuters. All those green Southern Region electric trains growling and flashing sparks from live third rails up to Catford Bridge and Charing Cross. Deirdre's mother was a legal secretary, and her father had driven tanks with the 8th Army in the Allied push up through Italy between 1943 and 1945. He also played trombone with George Formby, a big and highly paid star at the time. She passed her 11 plus, but her small school was folded into Sydenham School for Girls, one of Britain's first comprehensive, a type of school open to all pupils regardless of previous academic achievement. It says much about the country and attitudes towards women at the time that despite its nod to inclusiveness and equal opportunities, it nevertheless prepared pupils first and foremost for domestic and secretarial servitude. She learned sewing, shorthand and domestic science. The school was proud to show visitors its rows of Singer sewing machines and gleaming electric typewriters. What Deirdre wanted to be, though, was an artist. Her kindly head mistress explained the perils of painting. If only Deirdre pursued typing and shorthand, she would leave school ready to take notes, type, sew and cook. Ideal qualifications for a young woman from Sydenham shortly before the 1960s threw so many conventions, ways of life, and art too, high as a kite into the air. Deirdre did win one concession. She was allowed to take O-level art, alongside her 8 RSA exams, which she was told were equivalent to O-levels. There was no RSA exam for art. Serendipitously, perhaps, it was Deirdre's shorthand and typing, as much as her prized O-level, that opened the door for her to go to art school. Her second job after leaving school was as a secretary in the studio of the highly regarded architects Chamberlain, Powell and Bon, busy at the time with the design and construction of the City of London's vast and heroic Barbican estate. This was a highly civilised and inventive office. One of the key design architects on the Barbican projects was Leopold Rubinstein, who had trained with Le Corbusier in Paris. The practice also did a wonderful job of designing Newhall, Cambridge, my mother's university college. Deirdre was an inveterate sketcher. Her employers noticed her drawings. They suggested she go to art school. While this was music to Deirdre's ear, she was horrified to learn that colleges did not recognise RSA exams. The only school running its own diploma programme that might accept her was the Byam Shore. Even then, money was a problem. Deirdre had saved hard, but nothing like the funds she needed for a year at Byam Shore. Maurice de Saismaris came to her rescue. His secretary, he said, did not take shorthand. Now, if Deirdre were to come by their office every afternoon at 4 o'clock to take shorthand, her fees would be waived, as long as she attended night school and sat those missing O-levels. These would be essential for her to move on after the Byam Shore. Although she had taken a full set of RSA exams, it was necessary to retake these as O-levels in order to enter a degree course at Wimbledon School of Art. I was as impressed with Deirdre's resolve and determination as Maurice was, and these were characteristics we shared. And the ones we look for, although not forensically so, in the many talented young people we employ at Dyson, from whatever background or walk of life. The Royal College of Art was in so many ways a real eye-opener. I signed up to study furniture design, but soon found that it was possible to change courses and to steer a line between and through them, meeting fascinating people and learning much along the way. The RCA's thinking was radical. At the time, it went against the grain for an engineer to be a designer as well. You didn't switch professions. Designers were mostly thought of as consultants, or those, in my imagination, who didn't get their hands dirty and who were concerned with looks rather than function. They were wholly remote for engineers in white lab coats who gave structure to things and made them work. I loved my time at the RCA, not least because of its lively and inventive cross-disciplinary approach. Here, as I progressed, I realized that art and science, inventing and making, thinking and doing, could be one and the same thing. I dared to dream that I could be engineer, designer and manufacturer at one and the same time. In 1959, the scientist and novelist C.P. Snow gave a famous lecture, The Two Cultures, on the ever-growing and unhealthy divide he saw between science and the humanities. Snow went on to make his point tellingly. A good many times, he wrote, I have been present at gatherings of people who, by the standards of traditional culture, are thought highly educated and who have with considerable gusto been expressing their incredulity at the illiteracy of scientists. Once or twice I've been provoked and have asked the company how many of them could describe the second law of thermodynamics. The response was cold. It was also negative. Yet I was asking something which is the scientific equivalent of, have you read a work of Shakespeare's? Snow found the British system of education guilty. Since the Victorian era, science has been overshadowed in schools by humanities, and especially by the teaching of Greek and Latin. Where German and American schools valued science and technology, we in Britain tended to look down on those subjects, and on industry, as somehow grubby, or, if not grubby, then somehow uncultured and even anti-intellectual. I am afraid, C.P. Snow, that nothing much has changed. If anything, science and engineering are even more looked down on today. What I learned at the RCA from brilliant men and women who knew instinctively how to wear their own considerable learning lightly was that intelligent inquiry can be delightful as well as productive. For me, this revelation began with encounters with my first-year tutor, Bernard Myers, a walking one-man encyclopedia who taught design. He was especially keen on the meeting and mingling of art, science, engineering and design, and on the value of technology. In fact, he taught industrial design at both the RCA and to engineers at Imperial College. Bernard was a fundamentally serious person. During my first face-to-face tutorial with him, he said, when you design something, everything about it has to have a purpose. There has to be a reason. I looked around at the best designs of the time, like Issigonis's Mini, the new architecture of Norman Foster and Richard Rogers, and at the radical designs of the American inventor Buckminster Fuller, and I saw that Bernard was right. I have based all my design on this ever since. Honest, purposeful design reflecting its technology and engineering. At the same time, this is very much the era of anything goes, a time of brilliant flowering of new art, design, fashion, colour and music. Non-conformity was celebrated. I began to grow my hair, wear flowery shirts and bell-bottom trousers made to measure inside Kensington Market, which smelt of incense and patchouli and was packed with colourful clothes. Kleptomania in Carnaby Street, the place in those days to buy clothes, proved to be just one edgy peak in the phantasmagorical world shaped by art college graduates letting rip in London in the mid-60s. As it happened, many of them were from the RCA, showing how young people, encouraged to be creative, could shine whether as artists, designers or entrepreneurs, or in fact, all three simultaneously. The fusion of original design, innovation and entrepreneurialism is something that has fascinated and driven me on ever since. I was lucky to follow David Hockney, the fashion designer Ossie Clark, and film director Ridley Scott at the RCA at the time austerity gave way to a new prosperity and new freedoms in the early 60s. Pink Floyd played at the college, our education was free, student power was expressing itself in protests, while mods and rockers gathered at seaside resorts. Unlike our parents, we hadn't endured the Second World War. We felt a new sense of opportunity. John Whelans, in my year at the RCA, and user of a dry powder hair shampoo that would inspire me later on, designed Tommy Roberts' multi-story Mr. Freedom shop in Kensington, where you could buy textiles by Jane Hill, RCA, John's PVC and fake fur false teeth chair, and wild menswear by Jim O'Connor, RCA, coveted by Elton John. Downstairs, the Mr. Freedom restaurant was decorated with pop graphics by George Hardy, another fellow RCA student, who went on to design the Hypnosis album covers for Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. King's Road was increasingly fashionable. By 1967, the street was, in parts, a colourful parade of one-off boutiques: Aquarius, Bazaar, Chelsea Girl, Garbo, Granny Takes a Trip, Hung on You, I Was Lord Kitchener's Thing, Just Looking, Kiki Byrne, Lord John, Mates, Quorum, The Squire Shop, Take Six, Top Gear, Topper, along with Just Men, where I got my hair cut. What was so interesting was the way in which RCA students revelled in this psychedelia, experimentation and pure fun, while also being keen on what Terence Conran was doing with Habitat in the Fulham Road, and on industrial design and the unflippant furniture of Le Corbusier, Charles Eames and Joe Colombo. Before he took on the design of Mr. Freedom in Kensington, John Whelans had worked for Norman Foster. Roger Dean, another RCA contemporary, designed highly imaginative new furniture, although he is best known today for his sleeve designs for albums by the prog rock group Yes. An earlier graduate, Alan Jones, a contemporary of David Hockney, who had designed erotic furniture, was refused a degree by the RCA because he would not submit written general studies papers for exams, arguing, along with David Hockney, that they were artists, not writers, and that, after all, academics didn't have to paint paintings. Years later, as provost of the RCA, I begged the college's academic board to give Jones an honorary doctorate, to no avail. The painting professor dismissed his work as mere pop art, in spite of there being a major retrospective exhibition at the time for Alan Jones at the Royal Academy. A wrong was not righted. Lapping up everything the RCA had to offer, I was certainly fascinated by what my contemporaries were up to, and quite aware of Vietnam and student protests, but I was never a renegade. I did, though, trade in wine to make ends meet, supplying staff and the junior common room, and I worked nights at a petrol station. My parking space in those pre-Yellow Line days was in Hyde Park. It witnessed a succession of second-hand cars, an Austin Healey 104 that took Deirdre and me to France and Spain, a split-screen Morris Minor, and a mini van. Between cars, I switched from furniture to interior design, which then, as now, is not the same thing as interior decorating. It was much more like architecture. RCA students were experimenting at the time with new materials like acrylic, PVC and polyester, while making cardboard chairs that could be folded into shape and disposable paper dresses. And in keeping with the open mind spirit of the times, they moved, as I did, from one department of the RCA to another. Art, design, fashion and even architecture was seen as a continuum. One thing we all learned in those heady days in Kensington is that art and design could be inventive, functional and exciting, seeking new ground without compromising in terms of quality. Perhaps subconsciously, I had learned that what passes for experience in many professions, disciplines and walks in life is often an attitude that becomes blinkered over time. At Dyson, we don't particularly value experience. Experience tells you what you ought to do and what you're best to avoid. It tells you how things should be done, when you are much more interested in how things shouldn't be done. If you want to pioneer and invent new technology, you need to step into the unknown, and in that realm, experience can be a hindrance. Back at the Royal College of Art, the tutor who encouraged me to shift from furniture to interior design and architecture was Sir Hugh Casson, famous for his role as architectural director of the 1951 Festival of Britain. I was mesmerised by Sir Hugh's ability to sketch so very lucidly on blackboards, and by his engaging manner. Again, he made me think that anything was possible, which of course was something he had proved on the South Bank in 1951, when he had commissioned buildings and architectural sculptures as fresh and as daring as Ralph Tubbs' Dome of Discovery and Powell and Moyer's Skylon, and realised them in truly tricky circumstances, what with shortages of time, money and materials, lousy weather, labour strikes, and a mostly hostile press. Sir Hugh, with one foot in the highest ranks of the establishment, the other in contemporary design and architecture, had a talent to amuse and enthuse. He cut a dash, driving a Mini about town and an ancient Rolls-Royce from his country home by the Solent. His interior design department was much concerned with architecture. There was no architecture department as such when I was at the RCA, but there was an industrial design department led by Misha Black, whose design research unit had become the design consultants for London Transport's sleekly functional new Victoria line, the first new underground line in 50 years. Opened by the Queen in September 1968, its subdued grey and brushed stainless steel aesthetic was the polar opposite of what RCA graduates were exploring in Carnaby Street and on the King's Road. One of my course teachers in Sir Hugh's department was the brilliant structural engineer Tony Hunt, then in his mid-30s, who did more than anyone at the time to turn me on to engineering and to make the connection between design, engineering, art and science. Tony was as passionate about the aesthetics of structures as he was about how they worked and were made. Actually, these things all went together. For Tony, a great innovator already working with Norman Foster and Richard Rogers on early high-tech buildings like their radical Reliance Controls factory and office in Swindon, concept came before calculation. There were exciting new ways of creating structures and designing buildings that can be imagined, invented, and then worked out with maths, log tables, slide rules, the way calculations are done before the calculator was invented, and increasingly from the 1960s with computers. Tony taught us that structure was architecture. Most enduringly good modern buildings of the past 50 years, like the Pompidou Centre in Paris or the Lloyd's Building in London, as well as medieval cathedrals and ancient designs like the Pantheon in Rome, are defined by the structure that holds them up, rather than by cladding or style. I was also really taken by the work of Buckminster Fuller. Hot news at the time in London, he had come from America to work with Norman Foster in 1967, he demonstrated, especially with his geodesic domes, that architecture and structure were indeed synonymous. One of Bucky's most enthusiastic supporters at the RCA was my fellow year student Anton First, an impulsive and highly creative talent who went on to design the film sets for Neil Jordan's The Company of Wolves, Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, recreating the hell of Vietnam on the site of Beckton Gasworks in East London, and Tim Burton's gloriously dark Batman, for which he won an Oscar. Anton's mentally unstable and alcoholic father died when he was at the RCA. Anton himself, dependent on Valium from then on, committed suicide in 1991, jumping from the roof of a Los Angeles multi-story car park. Fuller himself was an eternal optimist who would have liked to live forever, his way of thinking as wonderful as it was contrary. He aimed to turn conventional thinking concerning architecture, homes, cars, land use and the way we live upside down and inside out. He drew heavily for inspiration from the aircraft industry that necessarily sought lightness in its machines. Just add lightness became Fuller's mantra. This led him to create his lightweight geodesic domes. Patented in 1954, these hemispherical lattice grid structures, composed of triangular elements, offer the greatest volume of covered space for the least surface area. Strong, wind and snowproof, they found favour with the military, polar bases and exhibition organisers, although they were never mass-produced as homes, as Fuller would have liked them to be. I suspect this is principally because most people, including mortgage lenders, prefer conventional homes. Through Tony Hunt's teaching, Buckminster Fuller certainly opened my eyes as to what was structurally possible, and to just how exciting pure structure and design engineering could be. I could see that structural engineering would come to dominate architecture. I also understood that this would be true of products too, that their technology and engineering would become far more important than industrial design casings. My interior design course at the RCA had, through happy accident, tilted me ever more towards engineering. By chance, I was introduced to Joan Littlewood at an event in Clerkenwell, a district of London that was anything but fashionable at the time. Joan, widely known even then as the mother of modern theatre, was the founding director of Theatre Workshop, that had taken up residence in the early 50s at the dilapidated Theatre Royal in Stratford, East London that is, not upon Avon. She enjoyed critical success with the London debut of Brecht's Mother Courage and Her Children, which she directed and starred in, and won popular and critical acclaim with two early 60s musicals, Things Ain't What They Used to Be and Oh What a Lovely War. When I met her, Joan was keen on building a new children's theatre in Stratford. I came up with a mushroom-shaped structure, its spherical surface formed by aluminium tubes constructed in triangles and much influenced by Fuller. It was fun to do, and secured planning permission, but it never made it off the drawing board. It did, though, introduce me to Jeremy Fry, the inventor and engineer, who more than anyone else encouraged me to think for myself and to just do it. I based my design on the triodetic structural system, patented by Vickers, the engineering conglomerate. The company's London headquarters was Vickers Tower, the much-acclaimed steel and glass skyscraper on Millbank near the Tate Gallery. Designed by Ronald Ward and Partners, it had opened in 1963. Here I was shown a black and white film of the construction of a triodetic factory roof. I asked who the man in the film was, lifting the entire aluminium tube roof of his new factory on his own with a set of pulleys. He was Jeremy Fry of Rotork. In 1967, I engineered a meeting with Jeremy through a friend of his. I drove down with my model of the theatre in the Healy 104 to Widcombe Manor, Jeremy's glorious early Georgian house in Bath. Over whiskies, my charismatic host said he wouldn't help finance my theatre, but suggested I might like to consider doing some projects with him. The first of these, for the theatre and film director Tony Richardson, was to design the seating and auditorium of the London Roundhouse at Chalk Farm for its first ever event, Richardson's production of Nicol Williamson's Hamlet. My Joan Littlewood Mushroom Theatre may not have come off, but here I was designing another circular auditorium for a high-profile production. Opened in 1966, the Roundhouse was far from an ultra-modern lightweight steel structure. It was a former engine shed, commissioned by the London and Birmingham Railway. The Great Circular Engine House, however, was a brilliant radical design of its time, a highly functional circular structure entirely free of ornament or decoration, shaped in white Suffolk brick and enclosing 24 tracks for locomotives clustered around a central turntable. A ring of 24 cast-iron columns, forming a circle, a polygon really, around the turntable, supported a conical roof, crowned with an open-sided lantern to emit steam and smoke. The logic and engineering of the design were impeccable, yet the building was quickly superseded. For more than a century, it had served nothing more than a warehouse, if memorably so, for Gilbey's gin. A friend, Torquil Norman, an eternally optimistic entrepreneur, has since bought and brilliantly restored the building as a performing arts venue. But back to Jeremy. The first project he asked me to do was a pair of Jesus floats, floating skis, for his 8-year-old daughter so that she could walk on water. This is harder than you think because skis on water want to do the splits. Because your feet are spaced slightly apart, the downwards force of your weight divides outwards, and if there is no grip on the floor, or water in this case, your feet simply slip sideways. I solved this by connecting the skis with elastic cord. The next project was a circular pedalo made of a bicycle with paddles braced to the spokes of the rear wheel. The front wheel was removed and replaced with a rudder. The hull was balsa wood, on the underside of which Deirdre created a painting of a turtle with glorious colours. We tried it out on Pamploni Beach at Saint-Tropez, where it did indeed turn turtle, many times. In 1968, Pamploni Beach was a glamorous place to be, even though there was only one cafe, and that barely had a roof. Next, I made a roof from plywood box sections to be bolted together on site, made in Gloucestershire, and driven to Provence by Deirdre and me for a conversion of a long barn. One evening, Jeremy asked me if I'd like to engineer an invention of his, a high-speed, flat-bottomed landing craft, or sea truck, that could lift itself over the water riding on a layer of bubbles. We called this an air-lubricated hull. Jeremy had built a plywood sea truck, but this rotted while being eaten by beetles. Jeremy wanted to make a version in glass fibre, a more suitable material for a boat hull. The problem was that plywood, which flexes without breaking, is a much more suitable material for a large, flat platform like the sea truck. Boats are normally curved and egg-shaped, deriving strength from this form, and glass fibre is a highly suitable material. It is, in fact, not dissimilar in concept to an eggshell. The problem was how to provide the necessary torsional stiffness to the large, flat shape of the sea truck, while keeping it very light, an essential quality for the high speeds envisaged. We solved this by having a light cruciform chassis between the hull and deck. Jeremy asked me to engineer, prototype and sell the glass fibre sea truck. An art student just beginning his penultimate year at college, I was offered a job as head of a new marine division of Jeremy's successful engineering company, Rotor. I jumped at the opportunity. Jeremy, however, insisted that I complete my degree, which is why my third-year project at the RCA was the engineering design of the sea truck. This was a curious project, perhaps, for a student supposedly studying architecture and interior design. As open-minded as ever, however, Sir Hugh Casson allowed me the plain sailing I needed to complete the design of the boat and, in my final year, was quite content for me to work on another project for Jeremy, during which time the prototype of the sea truck was being built. The new project was the wheel boat, a boat with drum-like wheels that provided the propulsion and flotation instead of propellers, and which would allow it to cross land and sea in a rather different way from Christopher Cockerell's hovercraft. The origin of the idea was that boats, including the sea truck, lived on water and were unable to travel on land. This meant that they were liable to wear and tear by the constant corrosive effect of water, particularly salt water. If, however, the craft lived on land and only went into the water when necessary, corrosion would be limited or even non-existent. While amphibious vehicles immediately come to mind, the performance of these was and remains compromised. They are slow on land and slow in water. Meanwhile, it is well known that the most effective form of propulsion at sea is a paddle wheel. On a calm day, a paddle wheel can outperform a boat's propeller in terms of efficiency. It's a different matter when considering speed, where a paddle wheel is slower, or in rough seas, where the paddle wheel regularly comes out of the water and loses thrust. Jeremy wondered whether we could make a vehicle that could both float on its wheels, like a jeep with giant wheels, and be propelled by them. That was the starting point. I took this on as my final year project, while I was supposed to be designing buildings. Charming Sir Hugh Casson was indeed both lenient and encouraging. Jeremy and I had this image of a high-vantage jeep-type body connected on suspension arms to 4 very large wheels, providing the flotation, with pedals incorporated providing the propulsion. The first task was to consider the size of the wheel necessary to provide the flotation, and then to develop the propulsion method for those wheels on a scale model. The test tank was to be the garden pond at Widcombe Manor. It was actually more of a small lake than a pond. I did the calculations for the flotation, knowing the weight of the engine, propulsion system, vehicle body and load, and discovered the wheels would have to be about 3 meters in diameter. I then built a scale model for testing purposes. The test rig was a tripod that would have the lake bottom as its foundation. There would be a boom arm that would rotate around the centre of the tripod, with the wheel at one end and the drive motor at the other. The drive motor would be connected by a drive shaft to the wheel. The boom arm would be the support for the drive shaft and the drive motor. The motor would be a Briggs & Stratton lawnmower engine with a V-belt reduction to the drive shaft. The wheel would be made of marine ply for its sides and plastic for the circumferential surface hitting the water. Paddles would be screwed onto the wheel's circumference. I was able to install the steel tripod on the lake bottom and weigh it down with stones. Every day I would take out the boom arm on a small plastic boat, having filled the engine with petrol, and fix the paddle configuration for the day's test. However, I had to paddle the boat back to the bank to moor it, otherwise it would have been in the way of the boom arm as it rotated around the tripod. This left me to swim back to the tripod, to pull-start the motor, and conduct the test with a stopwatch. I had to edge delicately around the tripod behind the boom arm as it rotated, otherwise it would have knocked me off. Fortunately, it was April and not too cold by the time we started the in-water tests. These were conducted using various loads on the wheel, housed in an adjacent wooden box, and with various depths and widths of paddle, as well as different numbers of paddles, and determining the speed obtained with a fixed speed and power of motor. At this stage, the paddles were radial, although this was to change dramatically when the development continued 13 years later. The results were sufficiently interesting, first for me, to obtain my postgraduate degree, having studied the wrong subject, and secondly, for us to revive the project in 1983. Following our convocation at the Royal College in 1969, my contemporaries went off to practice as designers. And although the talented and successful yacht designer John Bannenberg had offered me an exciting design job, I had other ideas. I would not practice as a designer. I had engineered the sea truck at college and would now leave the RCA to make and sell it. Chapter 7. Core Technologies. I never intended Dyson to be just a vacuum cleaner company. The Cyclone was the first of our core technologies to be applied to a product, and this happened to be a vacuum cleaner. I always saw this as our first step. Since then, we've focused on pioneering core technologies around which we have engineered better products in a growing number of fields, nailing our colours to even more masts as we've sailed on and grown. Ours, though, has been neither a quick nor cheap approach. Investment in new technologies requires many leaps of faith and huge financial commitment over long periods. En route, there are multiple failures, sleepless nights, a great deal of frustration, and just a few real breakthroughs. Ours has been more of a pilgrim's progress than a straight path to success. The upright DC01 vacuum cleaner might have been a rapid commercial success, yet we, as relentlessly dissatisfied engineers, immediately and impatiently had ideas to make a better one. At the same time, we were keen to apply our Cyclone technology to different formats. Upright vacuum cleaners had been invented in the USA to deal with fitted carpets, for which they needed a beta brush bar. You push them in front of you by the handle at the top, a bit like a lawnmower. They were brought to Britain in the 1930s and gained popularity along with fitted carpets, but not to other countries, most of which use cylinder cleaners, so called because they were originally metal or cardboard cylinders. You pulled these behind you with a hose and wand extending ahead. They did not have a brush bar because, unlike American houses, other countries didn't have fitted carpets, so had no need for it. We wanted to make a cyclonic cylinder cleaner next. This was the compact DC02 that sat securely on stairs. DC03 was designed to be a very light upright vacuum cleaner indeed, an important antidote to heavy vacuum cleaners. Just 100 millimeters thick, it could be laid completely flat to clean underneath furniture. This flatness and thinness meant it could be hung on a peg against a wall for storage. Obsessed with HEPA filters, we fitted a pair of large ones to the DC03, one before and one after the motor. HEPA filters are high-efficiency particulate arresters, of the sort you might previously have found in hospital vacuum cleaners and in hazardous places such as nuclear facilities. They use very fine glass strands in densely packed pleated media. The pleated media creates a much larger surface area, and since the air must only pass through the media at a specified low velocity, the surface area of the media is critical. So too is the sealing around the filter, which is why every single Dyson fitted with a HEPA filter is tested on the production liner for HEPA efficacy. DC03 was also the first vacuum cleaner with a clutch to disengage the brush bar drive, or, if the brush bar were jammed by a piece of Lego, for example, for the clutch to slip and save damage to the drive belt, a major headache for users. We were able to guarantee toothed drive belts for a lifetime. We also produced a clear version of DC03, but ceased production after Turlux, the polymer we were using for the injection moulding, proved to be a less rugged material than the early tests had shown. DC01, meanwhile, was selling very well, and customers seemed to be pleased with it. But we kept on thinking of improvements and brought out DC04, another upright vacuum cleaner, but with more than double the air watts and suction power of DC01. There were quite lengthy ducts inside an upright vacuum cleaner to convey dirt to the cyclones and then to the suction motor at the end of the system. There is also a changeover valve that automatically actuates to direct the suction from the cleaner head or from the detachable telescopic hose. We smoothed out all the airways and the valve and improved the performance of the cyclone to achieve a power gain. We thought the DC02, our first cylinder vacuum cleaner, was heavy, so we developed a light cylinder vacuum cleaner that was also more powerful. I believe that it is crucial to keep on improving and never to relax with a product that appears to be selling well. Permanently dissatisfied is how an engineer should feel. DC05 was our first vacuum cleaner to use a power nozzle, a motorized brush to deep clean carpets. All conventional cylinder cleaners, including DC02, sit on at least 4 wheels or casters. This means that you drag around dead weight and have to force them to turn. Instead, we fitted 2 large rear wheels and put all the weight over them, so that when you start pulling the hose, the DC-05 did a wheelie back onto its 2 wheels, making it easier to push and follow you around. It felt so much lighter than other vacuum cleaners. DC-06 was our first attempt at a robotic vacuum cleaner, of which much more later in this chapter. The DC-07 upright vacuum cleaner, we're up to 2001 now, was the first vacuum to have multi-cyclones, 7 in all. These were placed upside down to improve suction power. It also had a clutch that not only saved the drive belt of the brush bar, but also automatically declutched the brush bar if you were using the hose. This saved the brush bar from damaging anything when it was not working across carpets. This was the first machine that we launched in the US market in 2002. While we were improving our vacuum cleaners, there were a number of diversions along the way. In 1999, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, Charles Moore, now Lord Moore, invited me for lunch at the Savoy, my only one there ever. He suggested I write a history of great inventions, in conjunction with the Daily Telegraph. This was duly published as a magazine series with the newspaper, and later as a book. Moore followed this up by suggesting I design a garden as a Daily Telegraph's entry for the Chelsea Flower Show. He kindly repeated this offer over the next few years, until an idea came to me, at which point I couldn't resist the diversion. I had teamed up with a talented garden designer, Jim Honey, whom I'd known for many years, to design what we called the wrong garden. The idea was to stress the virtue of not being afraid to do the wrong thing. Jim's idea was to have none of the pink, green, yellow or red colours normally found in gardens, but rather dark crimson and tan colours. At the front of the garden, there would be a water feature echoing a clever Escher drawing where water apparently went uphill. On either side of the water feature would be benches made only of glass, balancing in a seemingly impossible way on a V-shaped structure. Everything was to look impossible and wrong. This was Jim's first Chelsea garden too. He had to be on a very fast learning curve, as the garden had to be laid out in just 2 days and moved on immediately after the show ended. My water feature was made in glass, and, as in the Escher drawing, there were 4 ramps. Mine were 3 meters long, forming the frame of a square. The water was to flow up each glass wedge ramp and drop, like a waterfall, into a square pool. From this pool, the water would go up the next ramp, and so on. Each glass ramp was filled with pressurized water. Pete Gamick and I developed this with Derek Phillips inside the factory at Malmesbury. We discovered some phenomena which helped us. Firstly, the water, contrary to the visual impression of running up the ramp, actually ran down the ramp. It was forced out of the top of the glass wedge through a slot at the top of the ramp and ran back down the glass ramp. But because of the surface tension at the sharp edges of the ramp, the water did not spill over the edges of the glass, but spread evenly across the glass surface. It was hard to see that the water was not running neatly upwards. Secondly, we made certain that it looked as if it was running upwards by introducing streams of bubbles under the glass ramp inside the wedge-shaped tank, going from the bottom under the glass up the underside of the glass slope to the top. The effect was perfect. The bubbles on the underside of the glass ramp made the downward stream of water on the top of the glass ramp look as though it was instead flowing up it. We also had water running out of the same slot at the top and pouring like a waterfall into the square trough below. The final effect was that you thought you saw water running up the glass ramp and creating a waterfall into the square trough. It fooled everybody. The mechanics were surprisingly simple. At each corner there was a submerged water pump to push water into the glass wedge-shaped tank, forcing it out of the slot at the top of the ramp to create the waterfall. Then each tank had an air pump to create the trick effect bubbles starting on the underside of the base of the glass ramp and travelling up to the top. The total effect was of water running up each glass slope, cascading down into the next square trough, and so on, continuously around the square frame. It required Derek's gifted engineering expertise to keep it all running smoothly. I did give the secret away to the Queen when she asked how water could possibly go uphill. The glass benches were made of a long horizontal plank of laminated glass. An inverted V pyramid of glass was glued to the top of the glass plank at the centre, with an identical V pyramid under the centre of the plank. The glass benches looked as though they were balancing impossibly and dangerously on the point of the V of glass. The trick was that there was a single stainless steel cable that ran from the hidden anchor point in the ground under one end of the glass plank, up to that end of the plank, over the central glass pyramid, and down over the other end of the glass plank, and from there into the ground, where it too was anchored. At each point of contact with the glass, it was secretly fixed. This stopped the bench from toppling and gave the glass plank the required support when people sat on it. I was delighted when, at the opening of the show, Jerry Hall both bravely and decorously reclined on the bench just as I intended it to be used, as a photographer from The Sun happened to drop by. Most other gardens at Chelsea displayed wild flowers in charming ways. Not surprisingly, the wrong colours of our wrong garden did not appeal to all the judges. Jim was keen that our garden should be suitable for any garden, which would not be the case with short-lived wild flowers. Nevertheless, we were awarded a silver-gilt prize. The wrong garden travelled on to another show in Birmingham. We had better luck there, winning the Garden of the Show award. Derek was a proud host at the shows, as well as engineering and making and operating the garden brilliantly. I was immensely sad when the talented Derek, who had created so much with us over the years, died of cancer a few years later. We needed a larger boardroom table, and inspired by the theme of glass, supported by wire cables, I decided to make a legless glass table. The glass top, made from 2 laminated sheets, 5 metres long by 2 metres wide, weighed 750 kilos. 4 stainless steel cables came down at an angle, this is important, from their fixing in the ceiling. We were concerned about the weight, so bolted the attachment eyes right through the concrete floor above. The 4 cables went through stainless steel ferrules in the tabletop, then down to fixings in the floor, crossing over at angle on the way. The crossing over was crucial to prevent the slewing of the table. The cables were tensioned very tightly. The glass top was remarkably stable, more so than a table with legs. Everyone can sit at any point around the table without a table leg being in the way. Another very enjoyable diversion involved bringing vacuum cleaners to the Paris catwalk. On my trips to Tokyo, I would always be invited to visit Issey Miyake. He has only recently revealed that he had been 7 when one of the 2 atomic bombs dropped in Japan in August 1945 fell close to his home. Issey is a creative force and was a wonderful supporter to us as we found our way in Japan. I like his clothes too. In 2002, Issey Miyake invited me to design a show for the latest collection at the Paris October fashion event. Intriguingly, they had designed the collection based on Dyson vacuum cleaners. Some of the shapes of the garments mirrored those of various parts of our cleaners. Our technical drawings appeared on the clothes, all of which were silver and a deep magenta. I was enormously flattered by the idea and longed to see how they would execute the designs. However, I had to wait until the show before this was revealed. The theme of the show was wind. Of course, our cleaners used powerful airflow to separate dust from the air, so the theme was perfect. They wanted us to create powerful streams of air across the catwalk models as they walked down the runway, as if in a strong wind. The show was held in a large rigid tent on the Rue de Rivoli edge of Les Tuileries. I placed extremely large fan blowers at several stages outside the tent and channeled the air down giant, flexible yellow plastic ducting of 1 meter's diameter, just like our yellow vacuum cleaner hoses, but many times larger. These were made to sway to and fro by cables attached to the hoses, pulled by very strong assistants. The hoses extended right out across the audience to blast across the catwalk models. It was very hot inside the tent, and the audience were enormously grateful for the unintended air conditioning. To complete the flexible hose theme, I had the models appearing out of a 3-metre diameter snaking yellow hose, as from a tunnel, at one end of the catwalk. Afterwards, an excited Australian journalist came up to me and gushed that she loved the models emerging out of the giant yellow vagina. This was the first and only fashion show I've ever been to. I was astonished by the huge size of the audience for what is a short display, as well as by how wonderful and imaginative the collection was. It proved to be a commercial success too. What was I doing designing the backdrop for a fashion show? Well, I couldn't resist it for clothes based on our vacuum cleaners. Back in Tokyo after the show, some Dyson engineers and Issey Miyake designers created wonderful mannequins from Dyson vacuum cleaner parts to model clothes from the show. I was able to see these exhibited in the Tokyo Design Museum. There were even charming babies and dogs built from vacuum cleaner parts. In 1999, a physics graduate from Bristol, Charles Collis, joined us with his idea of a small screen being placed in front of your eye that would appear to be the size of an A4 sheet of paper. You could read a full page of text at the same time as seeing ahead. A camera could be mounted in the same spot, filming in the direction that your head was pointing. The device, which also had a microphone, would be connected back to your ears, with earphones for audio and down to a pocket phone computer. It was a brilliant idea. You could read emails or have them read to you, and dictate a response, as well as record and watch films, play music, and make phone calls. We built a prototype and were delighted how well it worked. However, we decided not to proceed with the idea, and Charles developed robots with us instead. A similar device was later bought out by Google as Google Glass. A more recent digression was the Dyson Symphony, performed at the Cadogan Hall, London on 18th of February 2018. Every year at Doddington, Deirdre holds an evening of opera arias, often accompanied by the Orion Orchestra. One year, over a drink in the kitchen, the orchestra's conductor, Toby Purser, suggested he commission a piece of music that used Dyson machines and newly invented instruments to represent the creative process at Dyson. There would be a competition to find a young composer. Remembering Malcolm Arnold's piece performed with vacuum cleaners at a Gresham School speech day, he wondered if these could be included. It hadn't occurred to me that Dyson machines could be played as instruments, let alone that anyone would choose to play them, but I jumped at the idea. As well as using vacuum cleaners and motors, we would challenge our engineers to invent orchestral instruments using Dyson components. Toby Purser and his idea captured the imagination of Dyson engineers, and I was astonished at the inventiveness and range of instruments made by self-selected teams of engineers. They clearly had a passion for music, and each played their own instrument. The largest was an organ with pipes made from 48 coloured aluminium vacuum cleaner wands, air generated by 8 Dyson fan motors, and valves controlled automatically by a computer. This was all housed in a Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome, also made from coloured wands. It sounded surprisingly similar to a church organ. Another instrument was a type of harp, with the plucking generated by a digitally controlled Dyson motor. And there was a guitar, whose notes were varied by a Raspberry Pi microcomputer connected to a gyroscope that measured how far the player tilted the instrument up or down. This meant that you could play different notes intuitively without all the complex fingering. Even the Dyson undergraduates, up to their neck with exams, contributed a clever pipe instrument. 5 of the most interesting and inventive Dyson instruments were then added to the composition. The composition competition itself was won by a Cambridge PhD student, David Roche. I heard his piece played for the first time in the Dyson Sports Hangar, and subsequently in the grander surroundings of London's Cadogan Hall. He had created his work after spending a day with Dyson engineers and acousticians, learning about the development process and its ups and downs, with hopefully a rousing ending. David and Toby created a novel and most creative piece of work. What could have been, no more than a gimmick, proved to be thoughtful and enjoyable. I believe the result is still available on YouTube for those who are interested in hearing it. Going back to the day job, DC-08 was a multi-cyclone cylinder cleaner replacing DC-05 and offering a big jump in suction power. It came with a bigger powered brush bar designed to deal effectively with pet hair. Although bigger than DC-05, it too had the wheelie feature, which made it feel light when manoeuvring. There was no DC-09, nor was there a DC-10. I felt these designations were owed to McDonnell Douglas airliners and not to Dyson. DC-11 was a departure. We were increasingly concerned about the anaconda-like nature of the long and unwieldy plastic hose, and the difficulty of storing both the hose and the wand. Although customers have had those awkward hoses and wands since the invention of the vacuum cleaner in 1901, every country disputes both the date and country of origin, they told us how inconvenient they are. We needed to try to solve the problem. Listening to what our users say is gold dust, and I really enjoy reading or hearing about complaints. We devised a system of reporting remarks heard by customers in stores or by store salespeople from all over the world, so that everyone in the company can see this priceless intelligence. While on holiday with my family in January 2002, I came up with the idea of wrapping the hose around the machine itself, in a racetrack provided, and telescoping the wand from 1.5 meters down to 0.5 meter, and clipping it against the side of the machine. As such, DC-11 was one neat bundle, easy to carry and to store. This was more difficult to develop than it sounds. We could no longer have the bulky cyclone bin, so instead we developed twin bins side by side, which took up less space. Each of the bins had its own multi-cyclones on top. The telescopic tubes, to make DC-11 as compact as possible, were designed to be easy to use. Normal telescoping tubes, as you find on a camera tripod, require you to release each stage individually as you compress it, and again fix these one by one as you extend it. We developed the wand so that once the first catch at the top was released, all the others followed suit. When extending, all catches automatically clicked into locked mode. I'll return to DC-12 in a moment for an important reason. There was no DC-13. Retailers and consumers in some markets can be superstitious. DC-14 was a new upright launched in 2004 with a lower centre of gravity and other design improvements, while DC-15 ball, released the following year, featured the very kind of ball I'd come up with all those years ago with the ball bearer. Other vacuums had 4 fixed wheels, which made tight manoeuvring necessary for a vacuum very awkward. The ball allowed you to spin, literally on a dime, as they say in the States. At this point, we decided that all our vacuums, uprights and cylinders, should sit on a ball for easy manoeuvrability. The ball cylinder had its centre of gravity in the middle of the ball, and indeed, for turning, spun on the centre of the ball. The motor and filters were inside the ball. We wanted to make the first vacuum cleaner that never required any maintenance, with no filters to change or wash, and of course, no bag to replace. The only interaction would be to empty the bin. We developed a machine with 32 cyclones. The secret to making them so efficient at collecting fine dust was to add what we called quivering tips at the bottom of each of the cyclones. The tip oscillated, thereby increasing their separation efficiency. We call this model the kinetic, spelling it with a C instead of a K for trademark purposes. While we improved every aspect of the vacuum cleaner, there had always been one vital core component for which we had to rely on others: the motor. The conventional motors we used were made in Japan. They were the best we could buy, yet they still had inherent faults. They had no form of control or intelligence. They were heavy. Their commutators, connected to the motor copper windings, were in continuous contact with the carbon brushes that provided the power. The commutator copper segments, to provide the switching, were fragile and liable to failure, and the carbon brushes not only emitted foul black carbon dust, but also wore out quickly. Because we were buying from a supplier, any of our rivals could buy from them too, and we had no control over quality. A vacuum cleaner motor drives a fan or turbine mounted on its shaft. This was equally unsatisfactory. It was made of pressed aluminium and stapled together, not the most robust of constructions. It was not designed for high-speed operation, nor was it capable of development for increased output and efficiency. I had been thinking about ultra-high-speed motors for quite some time. It was, in fact, a topic I discussed with Jeremy Fry during the development of those first cyclonic vacuum cleaners in the 80s. The theory is that the faster the electric motor spins, the more electrically efficient it becomes. Similarly, the faster the turbine spins, the higher the pressure output. With this combination, we could dream of smaller, lighter, and more efficient electric motors. At the time, we had approached an Italian manufacturer to do something interesting in partnership. They liked the idea of the high-speed motor, but didn't want to be the first to invest in it. They may also have been reluctant because vacuum cleaner motors were already fast by comparison with others. A jet engine spins at 15,000 rpm, a Formula One engine at 19,000 rpm, and a conventional vacuum cleaner motor at 30,000 rpm. Why go very much faster? Although at the time we were neither designers nor manufacturers of electric motors, we wanted to come up with a breakthrough in their design, creating a quantum leap in performance. Many times faster, much lighter and smaller, brushless for a longer life and no emissions, and more electrically efficient, and above all, controllable for speed, power and consumption. If we could make this revolutionary motor, then by extension, we would be able to make lighter, smaller and more efficient vacuum cleaners. And maybe other products too, something that Pete Gamick and I discussed early on. I began by recruiting brilliant motor and motor drive experts from universities and started a development program at 2 universities. The turbine speed we initially aimed for was 120,000 rpm, or 4 times faster than existing high-speed vacuum motors. We could reduce the diameter of the turbine to 40 mm instead of the conventional 140 mm because of the centrifugal forces generated at such a high state of revs. The smaller the turbine's diameter, the lower the centrifugal forces or loads endured. We plan to go smaller still. There is no doubt that embarking on making our own new technology high-speed motor at this stage in our existence was a leap of faith. In fact, at least one board member was against our proposal. His view was that we shouldn't think of competing with established motor manufacturers. It was too risky and too expensive. To us, though, the risk was surely worth it. Perhaps he had been offering good and sensible advice. The proposed investment was certainly eye-watering, but we carried on investing heavily. Today, Dyson pioneers the world's smallest high-speed motors. These have enabled us to reinvent the vacuum cleaner again with a pioneering new Dyson format. They have also allowed us to improve products in wholly new areas. By 2020, we were manufacturing 24 million motors a year on our own advanced production lines. These are assembled entirely by robots, 24/7, in our fully automated factories rated as clean room standard, i.e. no undesirable dusts or gases inside, in Singapore and the Philippines. Having taken this approach, we are able to control every aspect of our motors production and development. From the outset, the motors were designed to perform at the highest level in all our machines. This was important and exciting because the motors allowed us to make a rapid succession of jumps and even quantum leaps in the products we offered. People often ask if we would supply other companies with our motors. Although it might be profitable to do so, we supply no one other than ourselves. This is because I want Dyson engineers to be 100% focused on our next exciting motor development and not on retrofitting our motors onto someone else's product. Because we wanted a highly advanced, lightweight, brushless motor that would generate power at high speed while keeping cool and spinning as quietly as possible, we had set ourselves a significant challenge. We needed more brains to join the team, specialists in turbines, in plastics, software, aerodynamics, and even astrophysics at Malmesbury in Singapore. As the project gathered momentum, the motors team, which started with just 4 engineers, grew quickly, as did the cost. Very soon this was in hundreds of millions of pounds. There were technical barriers to overcome as our motors became faster. balance was a major issue, as an out-of-balance rotor spinning at very high speeds can exert astonishing lateral forces of 30 to 40 tons. Bearings needed to be specially designed and made. Specialist magnets and their attachment had to be developed, so they too could withstand enormous centrifugal forces. Shafts had to be of smaller diameter and highly accurate, sometimes made of ceramic. The high tensions and forces exerted inside the motor meant that we needed the world's best and most durable materials for production. For example, we chose PEEK, polyester ether ketone, an organic thermoplastic polymer that can reliably withstand operating temperatures of up to 250 degrees centigrade, melting at 340 degrees centigrade. Used in satellites and medical implants, PEEK is also very strong and can be moulded. It is also very expensive. A conventional motor does pole switching through the brushes onto different segments on the commutator by brushing mechanical contact. This provides a switching of positive and negative current alternately, as well as a magnetic field that excites the motor to rotate. This mechanical system would be far too slow and cumbersome for our new speeds. A new way to drive the motor had to be invented. A main drive chip on the circuit board allows switching 6,500 times per second. The setup cannot wear out, since it relies on digital switching within the chip, rather than anything mechanical, and is capable of extraordinary speeds. The use of the chip as the fundamental drive is why we named this new type of motor a Dyson digital motor. We have made different designs of both AC, alternating current, and DC, direct current, electric motors, each working in a different way, improving the design and output each time, becoming smaller and more powerful. In time, and as Dyson became more global, we also discovered the effect of altitude on the motor. As anyone who has driven a small or medium-powered car up and across mountain roads knows, performance tails off as the engine draws in ever thinner air. Might it perform differently in Colorado, the Swiss Alps, or Mexico City? In case you're wondering, our motors now use an altitude meter so that they can adjust their performance depending on their height above sea level. The motor will work just as well in Mexico City as it will in the Zyzer Z works. It is so accurate, it can determine whether it's sitting on a table or lying on the floor. The development and testing process was, in its Lilliputian way, rather like Frank Whittle's with his first jet engine. We were soon working with aero engineers at the Whittle Laboratory in Cambridge, alongside Rolls-Royce and its mighty turbofan jets. The scale of the challenge, it must be said, was not directly proportional to the scale of the motor. With each new version of the motor, we aim to double its power output and halve its weight. The motor remains a great focus of ours, and we now have a global team working with universities, including Cambridge, and dedicated labs at Newcastle. Creative design is as much a part of solving problems in prototyping, manufacturing, testing, rectifying, and improving products as it is in their conception. We do lots of important work with universities, not relying on them for innovation, but rather using them as an extension of our own research department, and this is as it should be. DC-12 was the beginning of a new chapter for us, since it was our first digital motor cleaner, designed for Japan, where apartments are often smaller than those commonly found in Europe or North America. We waited some time before applying our Dyson digital motor to all our vacuum cleaners, as it's very expensive. In fact, it costs 5 times more than a conventional motor. This was entirely due to the electronics, not the motor itself. This is often the case when a new technology is first launched. It may take years to bring the cost down to anywhere near the old technology, and so its introduction in the first place really is an article of faith. But such faith and perseverance have enabled us to make these leaps forward. In the process of its long gestation, our digital electric motor was about to transform Dyson. Handheld battery vacuum cleaners have been around for many years for above-floor cleaning, for cars, and for boats. They sold well, but suffered from a clogged bag issue. The bags were tiny and presumably needed very thorough washing to try to rid them of the clogged dust, so they were probably permanently choked. They also had very little power, and even that faded very quickly as the batteries ran down. We knew that we could overcome the clogging problem by using smaller versions of our cyclonic separation system. We also knew that we could overcome the feeble battery power by using lithium-ion batteries, even though in 2012, when we started to do so, these were very expensive and were not used in appliances. As our mantra is no loss of suction, we thought we would challenge the idea that battery-powered devices should suffer a fade in power as the battery empties. This fade occurs because voltage in the cells reduces as the charge leaves them. We devised software and electronics that would maintain the voltage as the charge left. This meant that the cells would flatten more quickly, but at least you have full performance until the end coming suddenly. This was a risky policy, as our competitors would argue that our charge would not last as long as theirs. But we believed that someone using a vacuum cleaner would want to do the task as quickly and effectively as possible, and they would not like hearing the motor gradually slowing down and its suction declining. This in fact proved to be the case when we launched DC16, our first handheld vacuum cleaner. We were criticised for its short run time, though this criticism has largely gone. We also gambled that battery performance would improve over time, as indeed it has. We think Dyson DC16 is the first example of a battery-powered product that doesn't fade in use. We were still in the midst of developing motors for powerful mains-powered vacuum cleaners, and it hadn't occurred to us that the future of all our products would be in small battery-powered motors. There is a serendipitous quality to invention, as there has been in our quest to engineer better products. We had observed, for example, that handheld vacuum cleaners had the handle at one end and the entire product cantilevered forward from it, making the cleaners heavy to hold. Bizarre, of course, for handheld vacuum cleaners. If you hold something heavy in your hand, it's better that the weight is centered on your wrist. So we put the two heavy components above and below the wrist, motor above, battery below, and with the handle as a pistol grip between the two. That left just the cyclone and the bin, which are light, in front of the wrist. This design avoided the heavy pull forwards of existing handhelds. After we'd been successfully making the DC16 for 2 years, in 2012, an engineer tried attaching one of our upright cleaner's wands onto the inlet of the DC16 with a cleaner head on the other end. What Pete and I were looking at was something we'd never seen before, but which was also incorrect thinking. Upright and cylinder vacuum cleaners are designed to avoid putting the weight of the machine, including the motor, onto the user. In both cases, heavy components sit on the floor. Here we were putting the entire weight into the user's hand. While this seemed like wrong thinking, what suddenly occurred to us was that if the weight could be light, then the entire product would be light, and the ability to maneuver and clean would be so much easier. There were other matters to consider. Pete and I had been worried about the long hoses and ducts on vacuum cleaners, partly because they cause a pressure loss, but also because they are unwieldy and prone to damage. We reasoned that if we could have a much shorter and simpler airway, we could avoid the waste of power. Similarly, if we could remove the unwieldy hose and avoid the large dead weight of the vacuum cleaner, we would remove by far the majority of the materials used. It goes without saying that removing the cord also saved that tedious business of unwinding, plugging in, unplugging, and all the faff just to move from one room to another. This procedure is frustrating, and we realized it was unnecessary. What we now had was a light, highly maneuverable machine that was a fraction of the weight without the restriction of the cord. Freedom at last. Together with our high-speed Dyson digital motor, this led to our new stick vacuum cleaner, the Dyson DC35 Digital Slim. Pete and I thought this was the future, but we were the only ones who did. I do understand why others hesitated. The motor is battery-operated, and batteries had not had a good history. and because it looked so thin, it seemed unlikely to be powerful. Its bin was relatively small too, and it's not until you take it home and use it that you understand that this changes the way you clean, little and often, rather than a blockbusting affair, since the Digital Slim is so easy to get out and put away. From V2 to V6 to V8 to V10, we've made leaps in performance with our Dyson digital motor while reducing its weight. The team under Andy Clothier and Tunjai Chelik have brought the greatest advances in electric motors since Michael Faraday. They have a long string of patents to their names. By 2016, we had established a following of people prepared to abandon mains power machines, yet the vast majority either didn't know this was possible or didn't believe what our new vacuum cleaners were capable of. This is understandable. I don't think many people follow the development of vacuum cleaners as assiduously as they do of cars or mobile phones. Our competitors had long boasted of their big 2,400 watt or 17 amp motors as big, in marketing terms, spelt powerful. By this point, our own sales were half battery and half mains powered cleaners. Even so, we decided to focus our future development on our new invention. In the process, we ended up killing off our original product, the DC-1 and its successors, with a better one, because it made sense to do so. Our latest machines pick up more than the bulky full-size variety can, while being much easier to use. I actually think this was a far more important development than the cyclone itself, the core technology on which Dyson was built. Our latest invention came about through the relentless process of developing small, light, high-speed electric motors, rather than a eureka moment in the bath telling me that cordless stick cleaners were the way forward. In spite of the Digital Slim cleaners being lighter, using fewer materials and less energy, they have greater performance than their predecessors and are much more pleasurable to use. This is a result of design, engineering and science coming together. This, I fundamentally believe, is why scientists and engineers will do more than politicians or activists to solve today's environmental problems. They have more than words, they have solutions. Our new Digital Slim vacuum cleaners now outsell our mains-powered machines 15 to 1. And of course, the usual vultures, hundreds of them, have jumped on the bandwagon, all making machines that look remarkably similar to the one Pete and I saw develop before our eyes. Typically, they waited until we'd established the benefits and performance of this new type of vacuum cleaner in consumers' minds before happily riding on our coattails and enjoying the spoils. Many of these rival products are flagrantly reverse-engineered copies. Their makers go further, copying everything, including our imagery, our marketing claims, and even our typeface. This is immoral. At school, you can be expelled if you copy someone else's work. In the commercial world, it is allowed, even encouraged, under the guise of competition. The senior British patent judge, Lord Justice Robin Jacob, argued, Apple versus Samsung 2013, that this kind of copying should be encouraged. He was wrong. Copying reduces choice for consumers, rather than encouraging different products working in different ways and achieving different objectives. Plagiarism is lazy, while avoiding the costs of developing and introducing new technology. Patents exist to allow the inventor to commercialize an invention without being copied for 20 years from the date of filing the patent, which in practice means 10 to 15 years of production. If the inventor didn't have that opportunity to make a return on his efforts, why would anyone invest in researching new and better ways of doing things? Lord Justice Jacob's comment applied to design of products, but if you followed the thinking, artists, musicians, writers could simply copy each other and reproduce each other's most popular works. Surely we want difference and originality, not similar products. We don't all want to listen to the same song over and over again, or look at the same painting, all done by different artists. Quite rightly, the law rules against plagiarism to protect the rights of artists. Why not the same in engineering? After all, patents are described as art. Prior art is a term for previous patents, and state-of-the-art summarizes the sum total of what has gone before. A patent will not be granted if it is obvious to one skilled in the art. In my view, since the patent system was devised under Henry IV in the 15th century and has changed little since, it is time it was substantially revised. For example, the 20-year life was devised under Henry, yet today it may take 20 years to develop, produce and release new technology onto the market. Patents need a longer life to reflect today's long research and development cycles. The weakening of patents due to obscure and irrelevant prior art, something disclosed in previous patents, needs to be overcome, as patents are too narrow and easy to engineer around. They need to be made cheaper to apply for, and renewal fees should be reduced, particularly for individual inventors and small companies. Finally, one change that was made recently should be reversed. This altered the principle by which an invention should be owned by the first to invent rather than the first to apply for a patent, which is the current ludicrous position. An inventor should hold the patent, and not a plagiarist who sees it and files it first, as sometimes happens today. If meanwhile our future was to be dominated by motors, we needed the right kind of new technology batteries to power them. This was the start of our urgent quest to make a quantum leap in battery technology. In any case, we were consuming something like 6% of the global supply of lithium-ion batteries, so the need to improve the state of the art was visceral. I look more closely at our battery development in the next chapter. We had been experimenting for some time with blades of air and working with sophisticated computational fluid dynamic models for a project that remains secret. We were fascinated by the power of these high-speed 400-mile-an-hour blades of air when one day we noticed that if you directed the blade of air across your hand, it would make the skin ripple. We wondered if it would scrape water off your hands, which it did. I was all too familiar with noisy hand dryers that took so long to dry your hands that you ended up walking away and wiping them on your jeans. This blade scraped water off your hands rather nicely, rather like the action of a windscreen wiper, and dried them almost instantaneously. We had accidentally developed a new form of hand dryer. What's more, it didn't need a heater. Existing hand dryers use big 3,000-watt heaters to evaporate water from your hands, turning the water into steam. It's a time-consuming and energy-hungry process. It's also unkind to the skin, removing natural oils from your hands and causing them to chap. Our discovery was that all we needed was the blade of air, and without the 3,000-watt heater. The only power necessary was 750 watts for the motor, and because the dry time is reduced to 10 seconds, the motor is only on for the third of the time of those of conventional heated hand dryers. In 2006, the Dyson Airblade hand dryer, powered by our very first mains-powered digital motor, went into production without any market research on our part. Hand dryers were underloved products, and we followed our instinct. The Dyson Airblade sold quickly to hotels, airports, schools and hospitals based on the speed at which it dried hands. With air moving at 430 miles per hour, or late model Spitfire speed, and on its energy-saving properties. It has a carbon footprint 6 times smaller than that of paper towels. We were slightly worried about the noise and have since made it much quieter. However, an architectural practice that fitted them in their washrooms surprised me by saying that they liked the noise. Why? Because they can tell whether or not those exiting the washrooms have washed their hands. Operated by sensors, the Dyson Airblade hand dryer was touch-free, its motor activated by infrared sensors, and fitted with HEPA filters, capturing particles, including bacteria and viruses, from washroom air. We went on to make the Dyson Airblade Tap. This is a large diameter stainless steel tube projecting over the sink, delivering warm water and 2 blades of air to dry your hands from a pair of projections that look like aircraft wings. This means that you don't need separate locations for washing and drying in washrooms. It's quick and efficient and means that excess water is directed into the sink rather than dripping across the floor. I have these in my washrooms at home. Despite our inroads, the paper towel industry retains 90% of the hand dryer market, worth billions of dollars each year. The big paper players want to defend a highly lucrative status quo. Although the Dyson Airblade hand dryer is small in terms of market share, it has brought us to the attention of the big paper towel consortia, who want to retain their business. This has led to some dirty tactics in the washroom. The European Tissue Symposium is a Brussels-based group representing the interests of the paper towel industry. It counts corporate giants Kimberly-Clark and Essity AB, previously SCA Svenska Cellulosa AB, in its membership, and has commissioned research that tries to show our products in a poor light. As we have discovered, this research is often based on flawed assumptions that then produce misleading results. These results are then used in an attempt to keep the unnecessary paper towel in the world's washrooms. Although a significant body of readily available scientific research shows that the Dyson Airblade hand dryer to be fast, efficient and hygienic, the paper towel industry wants to portray it differently. It has commissioned studies from two of its long-term consultants claim that Dyson hand dryers increase bacteria count on hands and spread viruses. They promote this research widely, yet to arrive at these bold and inaccurate claims, they rely on grossly misleading methodology. Gloved hands are smeared with bacteria and viruses from chickens, and, unwashed, dried immediately with a Dyson hand dryer. This flawed methodology in no way simulates the real-life experience of using a Dyson hand dryer. Such an unreasonable quantity of bacteria and viruses would never be on someone's hands, let alone on someone's hands when they go into a Dyson hand dryer. In fact, even these absurd test conditions show that our hand dryers distributed comparatively few particles. Conversely, research by the University of Bradford, amongst others, show that Dyson Airblade hand dryers reduce the transfer of bacteria onto hands by up to 40%, while the HEPA filter in our hand dryers purifies air in the washroom. In fact, if you examine the HEPA filter inside a Dyson hand dryer at the end of its life, you can see exactly how many nasties the filter has purified from washroom air. Of course, the bigger problem is the vast quantity of trees, water and fuel consumed in the manufacture and shipping of paper towels. Their use causes unseemly waste, which generally cannot be recycled. As often happens, our observations during the development of the Dyson Airblade hand dryer led us to the principle used in other products, like our air multiplier fans, and in turn to heaters, humidifiers and air purifiers. One thing we noticed in our research into airflow was the way in which the ultra-high velocity blade of air that prompted us to make the hand dryer could induce a lot of additional air behind it. This was the stuff of aerofoils and aircraft wings. It works according to Bernoulli's principle, a mathematical formulation set out by the 18th century Swiss mathematician and physicist Daniel Bernoulli concerning fluid dynamics. The principle is well known in the aviation industry. What it means in practice is this: if a small blade of high-speed air exists, in our case from an annulus, a narrow slot for the air to exit that extends the whole way around the diameter of the hoop, it induces a region of low-pressure air, or suction, from behind it. Thus, from quite a small volume of airflow, you can create one many times larger. Air drawn into the base of the Dyson air multiplier fan at 27 litres a second by our motor passes over its aerofoil-shaped ring, creating low pressure or suction that pulls air from behind and multiplies its flow to 405 litres a second. Without the need for conventional fan blades to accelerate the airflow, the Dyson air multiplier fan is as quiet in operation as it is safe, and over subsequent iterations we have made it even more so. Fans with blades chop the airflow, which causes a buffeting effect for users in its airstream, which can be uncomfortable. The Dyson air multiplier fan was a reinvention of air movement. Electric fans were of a design that remained basically the same since 1882, when Schuyler Wheeler a 22-year-old American electrical engineer, whose real invention was the electric lift, made the first known version. Conventional fans have the heavy motor in the centre of the fan, which makes them top-heavy and continually slumping on their angle adjustment mechanism. On our fan, the motor is in the base, with the centre of gravity around the middle of the base. We found that we could rotate the fan around an arc from its centre of gravity. This meant that whatever angle you chose for the position, it would stay there perfectly balanced, without the need for fixing or clamping. With hindsight, perhaps we ought to have launched the Dyson Air Multiplier fan in Australia, Japan, or somewhere else hot and humid in Southeast Asia, rather than in New York in the depths of a freezing winter. I drove out to New Jersey at 4 o'clock in the morning to be interviewed for CNBC TV's breakfast show. These presenters were intent on making this into a business story, but I wanted it to be about the invention itself, the technology. Desperate to turn the situation around in the midst of the interview, I stuck my head through the Air Multiplier fan's ring, or annulus, you have to be careful how you say the word, and this changed the tone immediately. One of the presenters decided to blow dry her hair with it, and then the other had a go. This slightly madcap TV appearance certainly got the Air Multiplier fan talked about. The following morning, I was invited on Good Morning America for a more glamorous version of my head through the ring routine. After the show, I was in a yellow cab in Manhattan. I called Pete Gamak and said, "It's bloody cold here. We've got to do one that puts out heat." So we started working on a heater. This wasn't so easy. I remember the electric heaters of my youth, with that horrid smell of burning dust, and their near hysterical whirring of fans as hot air and dust was shovelled out in a single direction. We needed to come up with a heater that would create ambient heat in a room and regulate its temperature. We also wanted one that was cool to the touch, wouldn't burn dust, and wouldn't smell. We settled on semiconducting, positive temperature coefficient, PTC, ceramic stones as a heater, which, combined with air multiplier technology, allowed us to heat an entire room and not just the area immediately around the fan. PTC ceramics increase their resistivity as they heat up, thus not getting hot enough to burn dust, so there's none of that acrid smell. Having learnt much about the science of HEPA filters from our early development work on hand dryers and vacuum cleaners, we then created an air purifier that could also heat and provide cooling air while capturing harmful pollutants. Incidentally, a 30-watt Dyson Air Multiplier fan is far more energy efficient than a 2,000-watt air conditioner. The blowing of atmospheric air over the skin causes the moisture to be released through evaporation, in turn causing a refrigerant effect of about 4 degrees. This is usually sufficient cooling, except in extreme conditions. Aside from a massive energy saving, this is also far more comfortable and certainly feels healthier than being in a room with a traditional air conditioning unit. Our purifiers use HEPA filters in combination with carbon filters. The HEPA filters trap particles down to a microscopic level, while activated carbon deals with harmful gases like formaldehyde. However, the carbon quite quickly becomes loaded with the gases and starts to re-emit them into the room in a process known as off-gassing. We developed a method of capturing formaldehyde for the lifetime of the product without off-gassing. This uses our cryptomic technology, through which formaldehyde particles are captured by a catalyst and broken down into tiny amounts of harmless water and CO2. Cryptomelane is characterized by billions of atom-sized tunnels with the ability to destroy formaldehyde. People spend the majority of their day inside, and indoor air pollution can be up to 5 times worse than the outdoor kind. The Dyson Pure Hot and Cool Purifier cleanses the air of pollutants and even tells you what these are in a real-time display both on the machine and in-app. Formaldehyde is released from many sources inside the home, including furniture, paint, wooden floors, scented candles, cooking, cleaning products, decorating products, and plants, presenting considerable concern, particularly in China, where it is seen as a cause not just of skin irritation and conditions like asthma, but of certain cancers too. Our purifiers work well and offer people an assurance other air filters cannot provide. One of the ideas that Pete and I had discussed at the outset of the digital motor project was to make an even smaller motor than the one needed for vacuum cleaners to replace the bulky, heavy and inefficient motor inside hairdryers. Conventional hairdryer motors have 50mm or even bigger diameter fans. We propose one just 28mm in diameter and a mere fraction of the weight. Because this would be very small, we would be able to put it in the handle of hairdryers, thus placing the centre of gravity, literally, in the palm of the hand. On other hairdryers, the heavy motor acts as an unhelpful lever, magnifying the effect of its weight. The head of our hairdryer need only contain the control electronics, the heater, and a large hole or airway through the middle for the air multiplier effect. For me, this was another of those products used frequently by hundreds of millions of people stuck in a technological time warp. Existing hairdryers were heavy and uncomfortable to use. Most seem intent on drying hair brutally with excess heat, and from personal experience I knew how loud they could be, with someone else waking up the whole house in the early hours of the morning. Could we make a light, quiet hairdryer that could dry hair fast without damaging it? To develop a better hairdryer, we first wanted to understand the science of hair, a complex field of study. I grew my hair so that I could learn by doing. Many of the male engineers also took to growing their hair long, keeping up with female colleagues, but couldn't tell their partners why. As usual with us, this was a secret project. Trichologists joined the team, while some of our engineers went back to college to learn more about hair, including how to style it. We learned that hair comprises two layers. The outer surface is covered with multiple layers of flat cells known as cuticula. Like roof tiles on a house, this protects the hair strand from damage. The inner and main structure of hair, the cortex, is full of keratinized hair cells. This gives hair its strength and elasticity, and contains melanin pigments that give it its color. Since hair is made up of dead cells, it is unable to repair itself. If damaged by heat, it will remain damaged until grown out from the root. Excess heat can irreversibly damage hydrogen bonds within the cortex of the hair. These bonds are responsible for providing strength and elasticity, as well as giving hair its ability to be styled into different shapes. At over 150 degrees C, alpha keratin slowly converts to beta keratin, that over time makes hair weaker and less elastic. Over 230 degrees C, hair begins to burn or melt, with strong disulfide bonds breaking down quickly. The surface of the hair becomes cratered and reflectiveness is lost, leading to a reduction in shine and gloss as well as damage. We needed to be able to control the powerful airflow and degree of heat precisely. We also learned that different types of hair around the world vary in strength and elasticity due to genetic differences, but healthy hair will withstand higher forces and stretch longer distances. Not only is hair much more interesting than we had thought in terms of its makeup, it's also pretty much impossible to replicate. We had to buy in ethically sourced tresses representing different groups, straight, wavy, curly, kinky, and different thicknesses, and then find out how each type of hair responded to heat and other stresses. The hair had to be free of all shampoos and styling products. To deliver a high-speed and controlled airflow, we applied the airflow knowledge we had built up with our Dyson air multiplier fans. This enabled us to amplify the airflow, producing a high-pressure, high-velocity jet of air. But fundamentally, the hairdryer demanded a new kind of motor. When positioned near the hair, other hairdryers with their flow fans suffer from restricted airflow, causing the temperature to rocket and inflicting irreversible hair damage. What was needed was a high-pressure turbine that could deliver the high flow even when the airflow was restricted. The Dyson Supersonic hairdryer was put through its paces, as all Dyson products are, in our in-house test labs. We have sound testing chambers in which the pure sound of machines can be recorded and analysed, called semi-anechoic chambers. I am recording in one now. These are built to a standard format, designed to prevent the echo of sound, in which the walls are not parallel and walls and ceilings are covered in elongated pyramid foam shapes. If the floors were covered in the same cones, it would be a fully anechoic chamber, but then you couldn't walk or work on it. If you spend any length of time inside one of these chambers, they are silent and echoless, you start to feel dizzy because you're not receiving any feedback of sound. This process of testing and iterative improvement prompted us to increase the number of blades on the impeller to 13, 2 more than standard. This modification, late in the day, meant that we obliterated one tone of the high-speed motor, with the frequency becoming supersonic. Above that is the audible range for humans. This means that we have a far quieter hairdryer than our rivals. It is also why the invention is called the Dyson Supersonic hairdryer. We had this revelation only a few weeks before launch, and yet, due to the highly sophisticated automated production lines that milled the impeller from a single piece of aerospace-grade aluminium, we were able to apply the changes immediately. Because the change was digitally communicated direct to the machines, the few people who worked on the production in Singapore were unaware of the change made over our network from Malmesbury. During 4 years in development and at a cost of £55 million, we made some 600 prototypes of the hairdryer, with 103 engineers working on the project. The product was quickly in short supply, since we had under-forecast demand, as we typically do. As soon as he heard about the Dyson Supersonic hairdryer, Karl Lagerfeld, the fashion designer, demanded to know how he could get hold of one, not for himself, but for his adored cat Choupette, who had 250,000 followers on Instagram and her own Twitter account. Meanwhile, we had become fascinated by the Coanda effect, by which air follows round a curved surface, wondering if we could use this to wrap hair around a barrel to shape curls. This became the Dyson Airwrap Styler, which we launched in 2018. This styles hair with air rather than extreme heat, meaning it causes less damage. The effect is named after the Romanian inventor Henry Coanda, who identified the principle scientifically in the mid-1930s and developed it for applications in the aero industry. The point about wrapping the hair around a barrel with air, unlike using a circular brush or mechanical means, is that the hair is free to fall off the barrel in perfect shape. The Dyson Airwrap Styler enables all sorts of curls, shapes, and indeed beach waves, or even straight hair, to be styled at a low heat, using the various tools and attachments we've invented to go with it. Jake and I did curls live on stage at the launches, curling a hair tress in New York, Paris and Tokyo, which shows just how easy it is to use. We were also looking at hair straighteners and the damage they can do using temperatures of 210 degrees and even 230 degrees. Traditional straighteners have flat heated plates through which selected tresses of the hair are passed. The idea is to apply heat and tension. The problem is that the plates grip the thick parts, but not the thinner parts of the tress. The result is that the thick parts of the tress are straightened, while the non-grip parts are left unstraightened. Thus it requires many passes of the tress through the plates at ever-increasing temperatures to straighten all the hair. The Dyson Corral overcomes this problem by using flexible plates that retain the tress in a neat block without stray hairs missing the tension of the plates on either side. The tress is treated with even heat and even tension, with fewer passes through the plates and therefore less heat damage. We also discovered that we could achieve the required styling more quickly while using 20 degrees less heat. Another interesting discovery was that maintaining a thick tress provides a cooling effect to its surface adjacent to the blades. This again prevented extreme heat. The flexing plates were difficult to develop and even harder to manufacture. They were made from an interesting copper called beryllium, which can flex and behave like a spring. It can flex even more if you apply many cuts across the surface, reducing its thickness while increasing its ability to bend. We're able to machine the prototypes, but the process was far too slow for production. We make them with a process called wire erosion, where the copper is placed in a bath of oil and a wire charged with high voltage cuts through the material at high speed. The plates are then treated in an interesting way which I can't share for reasons of intellectual property protection. The corral uses battery power, so users are free to style their hair without needing to be near a power socket. This is not only useful in the home, but also if you happen to be in the car, at work, or perhaps glamping. Although batteries do add weight and cost, there is not the inconvenience or tugging weight of the power cord. I was about to launch the Dyson Corral straightener in New York in early March 2020. The venue was ready, but then the coronavirus pandemic struck. Since I was in Paris at the time, the next day I did an online launch at our new Paris store, facing the exuberant Paris Opera. A camera followed me into the shop while I explained how the Dyson Corral worked by gathering the tress and providing even tension, and how it worked using a much lower temperature than existing hair straighteners. A piece of showmanship maybe, but someone commented that it was good to see the owner of a business explaining his technology. Throughout this period, we became more deeply interested in robotics, AI, artificial intelligence, and vision systems. There was a lot of talk in the 1990s of robotic domestic gadgets and machinery. While the idea of robots helping us in the home and garden goes back to science fiction comics of the 1920s and 1930s and to popular 50s films, for me, the reality had never lived up to the hype surrounding them. There was one further step to consider, however much we improved our vacuum cleaners. In the end, people still had to do the cleaning. What if we could just let the vacuum do the job instead? This line of thinking took us deeper into the field of robotics. We came close to launching a robotic vacuum cleaner, the DC-06, in 2006. But although it wasn't what I'd call a failure, it was terribly complicated. It cleaned the floor properly, but lithium-ion technology hadn't yet arrived, so it had 80 old-fashioned NiCad batteries, 84 sensors of different types, an array of microchips, and several motherboards. If it had gone on the market then, it would have been too expensive, costing somewhere between £1,800 and £2,000. We had learned a lot. While other companies were putting out machines that didn't clean properly and navigated badly, through a process of bouncing around the room randomly, only using proximity sensors, we decided to focus on advancing our own technology before trying again. In the meantime, we experimented with a mains-powered version that laid out a cord behind it, recovering it as it returned. Although it was very powerful, the cord limited its freedom of action. It could work just one room at a time and required the user to move it into another room. On the navigation side, we took a bold step and focused on a vision system with a Dyson-developed 360-degree camera that can see, film, and interpret. Our 360-degree camera is interesting. This is a hemispherical lens on top of the robot. It can see a 360-degree band from the floor to most of the ceiling. This 360-degree image is taken into the lens onto a 360-degree reflective ring and reflected up to the inside center of the hemisphere, where there is a round mirror. This mirror then reflects the images down vertically to the camera chip on the circuit board below. The camera comes to know waypoints, which might be the corners of a table, light fittings, or the edges of doors, from which it can judge its distance and work out where it is. Actually, we humans work like this, avoiding table edges and judging where we are in a given space using waypoints in much the same way. From these waypoints, the robot knows where it is, what it has done, and where it is going, even more accurately than a human. Naturally, this vision system took time to develop. Keen to find the world expert in the pioneering field of vision technology, we dispatched a member of the team to a conference in San Francisco. On arrival, he was told that the world's leading brain on this topic, Professor Andrew Davidson, worked at Oxford, 40 miles down the road from our campus. We have worked with Andrew ever since. We eventually launched the Dyson 360i robot vacuum cleaner in 2016, and 4 years later we updated it with the Dyson Hurist robot vacuum cleaner. These machines use vision-based mapping, Dyson-designed algorithms, and our proprietary 360-degree camera. They are first and foremost highly effective vacuum cleaners, but they also have intelligence and can see, understand and learn the layout of homes so that they can clean thoroughly and efficiently using the Dyson digital motor and efficient lithium-ion batteries. They avoid obstacles, humans and pets too, and return by themselves to the docking station when low on power. The Dyson Hurist 360 robot vacuum uses LED lights combined with its 360-degree camera to map in low light levels, for example, under a sofa or bed. The Dyson 360i robot vacuum returns to its charging station and sets off again once recharged. We have received some lovely responses from customers. One Japanese customer built a charming little garage for his Dyson robot. Appearing to be real-life characters, they are often regarded fondly. A first, I think, for a vacuum cleaner. Today, we work with more than 20 universities, the most significant of which is Imperial College London, to where Andrew moved from Oxford, and where we have a dedicated Dyson lab. We have major programs underway in Singapore, and we've developed our own research and development hub at our Lovington Airfield campus in Wiltshire, the biggest of its kind in the UK. These teams draw on an increasingly global group of software engineers who develop the code to bring it to life. We're experimenting with various robots and all the technologies needed to make these far more useful in the home than they have been to date. Meanwhile, there's still a long way to go with robotic cleaners. They can't climb stairs, nor can they lift themselves off the floor. Home is about as difficult and unpredictable an environment for a robot as you can get. Most robots work in controlled and entirely rational conditions, like our digital motor factories. But when working at home, while it maps and learns the domestic terrain, the robot never knows quite what to expect from one moment to the next. Socks, rugs, Lego, stairs, phone charging leads, and pets. We like our intelligent machines to do as much of the work for those who use them as possible, without intervention. Our purifiers, for example, continually sniff the air and respond to the pollutants and volatile organic compounds they sense. They respond in real time to filter the air and provide an air quality reading without interaction from the user. But while half our engineers are now involved with software, there are practical down-to-earth issues that remain critically important to the success of our products. These demand a willingness on our part to experiment and get our hands dirty. Some time ago, a Japanese magazine criticized all vacuum cleaners for leaving a fine film of dust on floors. Was it true? Was this something we'd missed? The magazine report prompted Pete Gammack and I to get down to floor level and find out. We sprinkled powder over a sheet of black acrylic and ran one of our vacuum cleaners over it. The Japanese magazine was right. Although removing most of the powder, a fine film was indeed left on the sheet of acrylic. On our hands and knees, we noticed that it required a damp finger or cloth to remove the film. It dawned on us that it might be sticking by static. We thought about the way we used to clean vinyl records with carbon fibre bristles that conducted the static away. So we developed a manufacturing technique for inserting carbon fibre bristles into our vacuum cleaner brush bar. The problem was solved and duly patented. The depth of research we're undertaking in programming, AI, machine learning, computational fluid dynamics, energy storage, acoustics, superconductors, and any number of pioneering fields has been scaled up significantly. Yet there's still a lot more empirical testing to do in our labs. Ballistics, for example. We do a lot of work on ballistics, which sounds more like something from the First World War than the focus of scientists and engineers working for what has effectively become a global tech company. As we developed our core technologies and created products that were sold in many millions around the world, we have also focused on material science and the research and development of new forms of pseudoplastics. This is all part of our quest to make products that use less energy and fewer resources. This is an area in which I see Dyson working increasingly closely with farms. Of course, we can't do everything we'd like to do. We are, after all, just one family-owned company following its interests and passions. Yet with all the research, development and growth shown in this chapter, at a time when pretty much everyone thought us just a vacuum cleaner maker, it becomes easier, I hope, to understand why we had truly grown beyond the boundary of our rural Wiltshire idyll. Chapter 10. Farming. Farming is not exactly in my blood, and yet I've developed a passion for it. Today I own 36,000 acres of high-yielding, good-quality farmland in Lincolnshire, Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire and Somerset. Dyson farms have evolved into an increasingly seamless part of our family business, employing the very latest science and technology to prove how agriculture can be profitable, how it can reduce our reliance on imported foodstuffs, and how it can be truly sustainable in the very long term. It might seem strange to think we can bring our farming and technology operations together, peas and vacuum cleaners, potatoes and hairdryers, in a symbiotic relationship, with the hope of finding novel approaches to driving performance and sustainability in both Dyson products and Dyson foodstuffs, and yet farming is not so different from manufacturing. It's about producing something, food in this case, and just as with a factory, the setup should be well designed, well built, and work as efficiently and sustainably as the best machines, using advanced technology. Initially, our farming operations were entirely separate from Dyson, quietly getting on and improving the ways they worked. Now we see the mutual benefit of bringing our farming and technology businesses slightly closer together. Dyson has always focused on making long-lasting machines that use fewer resources while achieving higher performance. Lighter machines, resulting from developing new technology and reinventing the format, consume less energy and are not only better for the planet, but also more pleasurable to use. Our cord-free vacuum cleaners, for example, are a fraction of the weight and use a fraction of electricity that their predecessors did. This has come about by taking an entirely different approach and developing new technology, motors and batteries, from the ground up. Material science, energy creation and energy storage are at the core of this, and farming has much to give, growing materials and creating energy that can be used in our machines. Meanwhile, Dyson technologies, among them robotics, vision-based sensing, AI and energy storage, will increasingly drive further technology innovation on our farms, leading to greater efficiency and superior products. The parallels between the two businesses, Dyson Limited and Dyson Farming, are greater than might be expected, with the future for both dependent on investment in research and development and on continual improvement. I'm hopeful that Dyson Farming will contribute towards the very necessary transformation of agriculture while protecting the countryside, and that it will drive meaningful advances in sustainability. Sustainable food production and food security are vital to the nation's health and economy. Britain currently imports 30% of its food. This is unnecessary, since we can grow almost everything, and the inwards importing transport results in poor carbon footprint. The same eco-warriors who are so keen on the rewilding of farms think nothing of consuming avocados flown in by air and other imported foods. Within our glasshouses, and with our fertile soil and more than ample rainfall, we can grow the food we need. At the same time, there is a real opportunity for agriculture to drive a revolution in technology, and vice versa. As mentioned, we're already developing ways to use agricultural materials in our products. This, as yet, is a company secret, but the research is fascinating, and we're getting there. Farming sustainably, and without recourse to greenwash, is very much to do with the cycle and recycle of energy and materials. The same ought to be true of manufacturing. We must move ever closer to a culture whereby we minimize the use of materials through lean engineering, along with the recycling of products at the end of their lives. It's not just okay to politely offset our carbon footprint. We have to deal with it at source. This has certainly always been our intent, but there is always room not just for improvement, but also for radical change through invention and innovation. Engineers and scientists have made, are making, and will make the difference, rather than the endless grandstanding by commentators. Farming is a visceral form of manufacturing with much to teach us. As in making anything on a large and repetitive scale, however, all the basics have to be right, whether it's the drainage, ditches, tracks, hedgerows, walls, soil quality, woodlands, the control of weeds, the nurturing of wildflowers, insects, birds, and other wildlife, the quality of farm buildings, machines and yards, the well-being of farmers and their staff. Everything must be of the highest quality, with everyone and everything working together harmoniously. There is no reason why a farm, its equipment, tracks, ditches and yards should be messy, muddy or untidy. We must always maintain high standards. All but one of the farms we bought to date had suffered from underinvestment and lack of maintenance. This is why they had become run down and inefficient. On every farm there were blocked drains, overgrown ditches, worn-out tracks, a lack of grain stores, black grass competing adversely with wheat and barley, improper crop rotation, missing hedgerows and collapsed walls. This, though, hasn't been for some innate lack of interest on the part of most farmers who were passionate about their farms, but because of a lack of capital and profit from the sector more generally. Not one of the farms had a modern grain store, so they would contract out the storing and drying of grain, meaning a further cut in their tight margins, while losing the added value of maintaining a high-quality grain store. For the first years, we had to spend heavily on the infrastructure before we could make our farms work efficiently and indeed profitably. All this, though, is jumping the gun. I need to go back several steps to my childhood and upbringing in North Norfolk. At the time, this was a deeply rural region, projecting out into the North Sea and cut off from the rest of the country. Second homes here were a thing of the future, while if anything, communications through North Norfolk declined as rural railways were abandoned. This was even before Dr. Beeching wielded his axe in the 1960s, closing thousands of miles of cross-country lines that left many towns and villages isolated. I was at Gresham School in Holt with a number of farmers' sons. Farms surrounded our small market town. In my teens, I ran across farmland every day, and during school holidays I worked on local farms. Deirdre joined me in college days. Although we went on to lead a very different life, the coach house at Bath Ford, where I developed the cyclonic vacuum cleaner, and our factory in Malmesbury were both in rural settings. I think I'd always wanted to own a farm, although only recently have I been able to see what I might be able to contribute to farming. Certainly, I've never had an interest in speculating in farmland or owning land for the sake of it, as if for a matter of prestige. Nor did I think we might make money from farming. Things changed quickly from 2013, when we bought 8,000 acres of the old Nocton estate stretching across heathland and fens a few miles south of Lincoln. Rich in nutrients, the black soil here has long been ideal for growing crops like peas and potatoes. The estate itself, once owned by the Earl of Ripon, had changed hands many times and was broken into 3 separate farms by the time we bought all 3 and brought them back together. A part of the estate's history, though, and what caught my attention, was its attempt to mechanise, using technology from outside farming. In 1919, Major Jock Webber, the Nocton estate manager, hit on the idea of buying railway track and rolling stock from the Army Surplus Store at Arras in Pas-de-Calais. Webber had served there, on the Western Front, during the First World War. He saw how efficient light narrow-gauge railways operating across sodden fields were. These had been the invention of a French army colonel, Prosper Pichot, working from the late 1880s with the railway and locomotive engineers Charles Baudin and Paul Decauville. While these light railways were used to transport troops, equipment, supplies, weapons, ammunition, and the wounded in wartime France, they would surely make good sense in the peacetime fields of Lincolnshire. They did. Eventually, the Nocton Railway extended to 23 miles, its former ration and ambulance wagons loaded with crops collected from every field on the farms. The railway also took post supplies and fresh water to remote farm cottages. It fetched and carried gangs of potato pickers, food and water for livestock, muck for spreading, and coal to the fen pumping station. More importantly, it carried thousands of tons of potatoes, direct from the fields to a main-line railway station on the Lincoln to Sleaford line, from where they could be distributed to anywhere in the country. The trains were hauled across the fields by tiny simplex petrol locomotives, converted to diesel, although until the mid-1930s the heavy trains to the mainline station ran behind a pair of steam locomotives. The tanks were replenished during the day from standpipes, one of which, in the guise of a handsome fluted classical column, we have restored and put back on its original site. The locomotives shared this standpipe with steam traction engines used for ploughing, threshing and pulling wagons. In 1936, Smith's Crisps, a hugely successful concern, bought the Nocton estate. The nation's hunger for potato crisps kept the railway going at full stretch until new farm roads and lorries led to its closure from 1960. The railway's engine shed was what is now called the Hive, our meeting and conference centre at Wasp's Nest, a wonderfully named hamlet on the estate. We've laid a new section of narrow-gauge track inside the renovated building, not simply for nostalgia's sake, but to remind us of how technological innovation has played a key role in Nocton's history. As for those millions of packets of crisps, in the 1950s, when we were sailing with my father at Blakeney Point on the North Norfolk coast, we used to stop off afterwards at the Anchor Inn at Morstan for ginger beer shandies, beer, and yes, Smith's Crisps, with those blue twists of salt hidden somewhere inside the greaseproof packets. Crisps were invented by Mr. Smith in London, and as well as buying Nocton, he set up a factory in Sydney, where they're still called Smith's Crisps, unlike in the UK, where they are now, disappointingly, Walkers. Our farms at Nocton and Carrington, about 20 miles east towards the sea, benefit from the rich soil they rise from. These are the fenlands. They contain about half of England's Grade 1 agricultural land. But until the 17th century, when Dutch engineers, from whom I am descended, were invited to help drain them, the fens were water-sodden and of little use to farmers. Following pioneering, if not always successful drainage by those Dutch engineers, real advances were made in transforming the fens in the late 18th and early 19th century by landowners and engineers of the stature and invention of John Rennie, a Scottish farmer's son. Man-made rivers, canals, ditches and embankments served by pumping stations, steam from the 1820s, diesel a century later and electric today, made this an engineered landscape with a haunting beauty of its own that works in all our interests in producing prodigious quantities of food. The vital pumping stations, all 286 of them, are fully automated and work around the clock to prevent flooding. In a 24-hour period, they can pump water from the equivalent of 16,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. In the 1950s, grants were paid to farmers to improve drainage by means of perforated clay pipes across fields and ditches around the fields to carry away the water to larger ditches and dikes. Over the past 50 years, the pipes have become clogged and the ditches filled in with soil, bushes and trees. Poor drainage leads to lower yields or ruined crops. We have cleared the ditches and excavated deep so that the crossfield pipes could drain into the ditches, and at the same time cleared out the pipes across the field or replace them. We have also crisscrossed the fields with drainage channels made by towing a stainless steel mole. These provide very effective drainage channels. We've been doing our own bit. We built a 50 million gallon reservoir at Nocton to maintain a balance of water levels across the estate and throughout the year, while on a micro scale, we drip-feed water through irrigation tubes to growing crops like potatoes. The fens are a waterland. They need constant surveillance and maintenance, including the annual clearing of reeds, privately funded by farmers, to prevent clogging of the waterways. Yet nothing, not a drop of water, need be wasted if the technology and infrastructure is right and evolves to become ever more efficient and courteous towards the environment. We've incorporated a specially designed lip around the edge of our reservoir, so water is always available for wildlife to drink from, and birds, amongst them oyster catchers, kingfishers and egrets, are flourishing there. The reservoir is surrounded by 15 hectares of wild flowers, so it's a haven too for pollinating insects like bees and butterflies. Engineering interventions in the landscape can be wholly in tune with it, rather than impositions upon it. Inventions and their innovation revolutionized English agriculture from the late 17th century. The impact of machinery like Viscount Jethro Tull's horse-drawn seed drill of 1701, or the Scottish engineer Andrew Meikle's threshing machine of 1786, raised the productivity of British farms many times over. Norfolk witnessed revolutionary improvements in soil health as its farmers, notably Charles Turnip Townsend at Rainham Hall, adopted a 4-year crop rotation cycle with fields given over successively to wheat, barley, clover and turnips. Each of these crops acted on the soil in different ways, each benefiting the others. English farms became extremely productive. The population grew rapidly. With a large supply of food and labour, a new generation of factory proprietors were able to think big. If unwittingly, the revolution in British agriculture during the 17th and 18th centuries, which also witnessed major improvements in the quality of sheep and cattle, did much to support the Industrial Revolution. In turn, the Industrial Revolution made farms ever more productive. In the 1850s, and while engaged in the repair of agricultural machinery in a Kentish workshop at Rochester, Thomas Aveling had watched teams of 6 heavy horses dragging stationary steam engines to and from farms. He likened this to 6 sailing vessels towing a steamer, a thought he said was an insult to mechanical science. In 1859, the 35-year-old farmer and mechanic invented the steam traction engine, that in turn led to the internal combustion engine tractor and ultimately, when combined with digital technology, to the new generation of machines Dyson Farming uses today. My buying of farms began with a conversation with Nick Warboys, a farmer's son, who came to work with me as estate manager of Doddington Park, when I bought this rather run-down Gloucestershire estate as a home 10 years before one part of Nocton came up for sale. Nick was very enthusiastic, saying the best farmland in England was in Lincolnshire and Norfolk. By the time Nick had bought Nocton on our behalf, we started to think how we might make a success of farming. Our first task, on buying the 3 farms to reunite at Nocton, was to spend capital and much effort modernising and rebuilding the infrastructure. As neighbouring landowners saw our restoration activities, they wondered if we would like to buy their farms. We never approached a farmer. It happened the other way round. Sometimes the price was too high. One of the best maintained farms belonged to Michael Cornish. I knew him and his father, who made some plastic components for us during my ball-bearer days. He wanted to retire and thought that we would nurture and develop his beloved farm. If we could revive these and other farms and increase their yield, we could perhaps make an impact on the country's over-reliance on imported food. In the great scheme of things, this would reduce the energy cost and carbon footprint of the food we buy. If at the same time we could generate our own energy from waste on our farms, we might, given the latest technology, become net exporters of electricity to the national grid. It got more interesting. Although this is not a new idea, I thought that if we were able to sell food direct from our farms, we could cut out the middleman, supermarket buyers, and so earn significantly more for our produce than English farms have been doing in recent decades. If you buy a packet of peas for £1 in Waitrose, for example, the farmer gets about 20p, 1/5. I know this because we supply thousands of tons of peas to supermarkets. If this sounds a bit harsh for farmers, there's more to it. Supermarkets only pay for peas when they need them. We plant the peas well ahead of this. We harvest them, bear all the risk, and act as bank for the supermarket. Alone, our 3 pea harvesters cost £1.8 million. We might be good at growing peas, I think we're the largest pea grower in England, but we earn very little from it. Over the last 10 years, we've lost an average of £100,000 each year. Nature can never be taken for granted. The food market is fundamentally skewed, so we're working out how to change the commercial model. If we can make a success of selling direct to the consumer, and so cutting out the middleman, we can also reduce our reliance on subsidy. As Britain has now left the European Union, powerful voices object to farm payments, which mean that subsidies will decline and big farmers, the main target, will be hit the most. The same people want farmers to be paid to turn their farms over to rewilding and to be used as leisure spaces for everyone. They neglect to mention that if we did this, we have to import all our food. Some imagine that big farmers are pocketing farm payments. Some of these, however, are for proven greening practices for the climate and environment, on which most farmers lose money. What they also neglect to mention is that it is very hard not to lose money growing food, whether you're a large or small producer. This will be the second major reform of subsidies. Prior to 1992, throughout the EU, farmers received price support for their produce. When the flat rate for land owned was introduced, it was seen as the saviour of farming. I'm not sure that farmers are seeing the latest proposals in anything other than their negative light, putting them at a distinct commercial disadvantage to well-subsidised EU farmers. As I know from experience, supermarkets buy where they can find the cheapest source, often switching to EU farmers as currencies fluctuate. Managing without subsidies and without a level playing field for British farmers may be a spur to fresh thinking, invention and innovation. However, farmers may yet give up growing food, and Britain will need to import more and more food to feed the nation. Food production is, of course, an old story, with the retailer taking the lion's share of margins. It's much like when I started out with a vacuum cleaner business. Wholesalers and retailers made most of the money then, which is why today a lot of our sales at Dyson are direct. Quite how we get to sell all our farm products direct is not an easy problem to solve, but we're working on it. We supply restaurants direct. We're looking at food boxes and markets. You can now buy Dyson peas, Dyson potatoes, Dyson beef and lamb, and Dyson strawberries direct from us. Along with grain and vegetables, we also make and sell electricity. Our Lincolnshire farms provide electricity through anaerobic digesters to more than 10,000 homes. If we could sell electricity to households at a lower price than they pay today, we would be only too delighted. But electricity bills don't come direct from the national grid. The electricity retailers have a monopoly of distribution, courtesy of Ofgem, the supposed regulator. Their demands sent out from an array of middlemen who do absolutely nothing except to play with computer programs and prepare and post bills. They neither generate electricity, nor take risks, nor maintain the infrastructure. Cutting out the middlemen and those who had no value ought to be a popular national campaign. It would mean a possibility of profit for risk-takers and producers and lower prices for consumers. And why is the regulator, Ofgem, preventing producers directly supplying users? The glory days of Nocton, meanwhile, were long behind it when we set to work. When visitors ask where the great house is that ought to be at the centre of an estate this size, we can only point to the ruins of Nocton Hall. The house mysteriously went up in flames at around the time we were talking to the local council about restoring it. While its style was Tudor, the house, now in ruins, actually dates from 1841. It rose from the ashes of an earlier Jacobean and Carolean house, highly impressive from all accounts, destroyed by fire in 1837. During the First World War, Nocton Hall served as a convalescent home for American soldiers. A military hospital again in the Second World War, it was run by the RAF until 1983, and then by the US Air Force until 1995. It had a brief life as a residential care home before being bought by developers in 2000. One day perhaps we'll be able to buy the ruins, restore it, and make Nocton Hall special again, with some new and interesting purpose. We're in farming and the stewardship of this and other estates for the very long haul, so we can bide our time to make things right. The ruins of Nocton Hall stand close to ancient woodlands that have been invaded over the years by domineering rhododendrons. They are also home to glorious oak trees, some more than 600 years old. This was a wonderful place when we first tramped through it, yet there was clearly a great deal to do. Fortunately, we're in the position of being able to invest heavily in the estate. A part of this investment was to bring together a brilliant team of enthusiastic graduate farmers and specialists in any number of related, if new, disciplines, among them a dedicated woodland manager. Along with shepherds and farm managers, we employ agronomists, researchers, engineers, drone pilots, and technical data analysts. Someone you see knee-deep in Cillian in the middle of a field here, come rain, shine, and Lincolnshire wind, might well have a doctorate in soil research. While we're investing in sophisticated modern machinery at Nocton, we're also developing the best natural ways to nurture soil, and so weaning farms off their dependence on chemical fertilizers. Many people, unconnected with agriculture, may well be suspicious of farming and science working together. Yet today's innovations are increasingly born from nature itself and are beneficial rather than destructive to the land and wildlife. The reason for this is important. Here at Nocton, we can improve the soil we use for growing crops with what's known as green manure, or plants that encourage the fertilization of soil. These are called cover crops and are planted typically between summer harvest and spring planting to improve the soil by retaining nitrogen, reducing soil erosion, and controlling weeds, thus avoiding the use of weed killer. We've done considerable research and trials to come up with the most effective recipe for cover crops. Without chemicals or fertilizers, flora and fauna flourish. We aim to establish a healthy balance so we can grow large quantities of healthy and delicious food while allowing nature to thrive. Walk through Nocton and you'll see brown hares racing across fields, buzzards and kestrels in pursuit of rabbits, owls emerging silently at sunset from the many hundreds of boxes we've made for them, countless bats and dragonflies in our woodlands, and so many more shy animals living as in harmony with us as is possible. Instead of spraying potato fields with pesticides to keep unwanted insects, aphids in particular, at bay, we intersperse the rows of potato plants with tramlines of meadow flowers. This means the loss of a certain percentage of the potato crop, but the wildflowers attract ladybirds that feed on the aphids and so save very many more potatoes. The flowers also attract bees, other essential pollinators, and birds that feed on insects. At the same time, we plant hedgerows to protect topsoil from the challenging winds that grow across the flatlands of Lincolnshire. Hedgerows are also a haven for birds. They're attractive too. I take pleasure in the fact that good-looking farmland is also the most productive and most sustainable farmland. At our Gloucestershire and Somerset farms, we're rebuilding 15 miles of Cotswold dry stone walls with the help of the Dry Stone Walling Association. I like the fact that we have the only man who can build dry stone walls staying on one side of the wall. This may sound pointless until you imagine the bother of having to keep climbing over the wall to the other side, as well as having to maintain a sufficient pile of stones on each side waiting to be used. Our man just has one pile on his side. I admire the skill of such craftsmen. Built without mortar, dry stone walls are costly to build, not least because those who know how to make them are in short supply. When we lived in the Cotswolds, Deirdre and I tried to build a 6-foot-high dry stone wall. It collapsed in a rainstorm before we rebuilt it properly. We hadn't understood the subtle structure of dry stone walling. We learned and rebuilt our wall. These walls serve a purpose, of course, as they have since the Bronze Age. They act as field boundaries. They serve as shelters for sheep in blazing sun, fierce winds and snow. They are home to many species of moss, lichen, small birds, mammals, invertebrates, lizards, insects and wild flowers. You'll find them in areas where it's always been hard and even impossible to establish hedgerows. Dry stone walls are a beautiful, hard-working and enduring part of the English landscape. Some of those you see in the Cotswolds and Yorkshire Dales are hundreds of years old. Protecting and encouraging wildlife while maintaining a natural balance that allows us to farm efficiently is a part of good stewardship of land, and a code of being that we aim to live up to. It's exciting, for example, to watch our giant combine harvesters at work. These employ the latest digital technology that allows them to work fields with a degree of accuracy farmers could only have dreamed of until recently. We use a combination of GPS and a beacon system, and it is the beacons that give us millimetre accuracy for each row of planting and working. Drones survey and map every last square millimetre of our fields. With this data, the combine harvesters are programmed to cut around the ground nests of curlews, lapwings and rare marsh harriers, a breed of bird that until recently was very nearly extinct. We are seeing a significant rise in the number of marsh harriers at Nocton and Carrington, and this has been achieved through the latest technology. We can farm with increasing efficiency while the birds thrive. At the same time, between them, our tractors and harvesters sow, fertilise and reap crops with a precision that means there is very little waste. We can farm with increasing efficiency while nature thrives. To me, all this is common sense. I'm not by any means a hair-shirted conservationist or ardent rewilder. I don't plan to release wolves onto our estates. Rather, I aim to be a highly productive and profitable farmer, growing as much good food as possible. But with the aid of invention, innovation and technology, I can help to shape farms with my colleagues where human demands are in balance with those of nature. It's hard not to be impressed by the latest farm machinery. Harvesters, for example, are huge and highly complex machines, marrying mechanical and digital technology. We have several Claas combines. These are German machines. Claas, in fact, invented and built Europe's first combine harvesters. In the early 1930s, though, the Claas brothers, there were 4 of them in business together, were unable to get support for their idea from German farmers. They were faced with that Henry Ford conundrum. If I'd asked people what they wanted, he said, they would have said faster horses. Instead, he offered them a reliable and affordable automobile that farmers took to like ducks to water. Taking the lead in the face of the faster horse brigade in rural Germany, August Claas said, "Then we'll just do it on our own." The brothers designed and made their combine harvesters down to every last nut and bolt. When farmers saw what Claas combine harvesters could do, of course they wanted them. This reminds me of my own experience when existing vacuum cleaner manufacturers turned down my cyclonic and bagless prototype. When you're sure of your invention, you have to pursue it as much for the sake of proving to yourself that it's a good idea, as in the hope of revolutionising the market for it. The Claas brothers revolutionised European farming. They had to give up production in 1943 when Nazi Germany was up against the wall, and fighter planes, tanks and other weapons were valued more highly than the latest farm equipment. As they did with Ferdinand Porsche's radically air-cooled Volkswagen, it was the British who recognised the significance of the Clark Brothers combine harvesters. Orders from Britain lifted the company back on its tracks soon after the fall of the Nazi regime. Clark's farm machinery is highly efficient and reliable, but not cheap. Our machinery is part of the £110 million that we've invested so far, beyond land purchase costs. It was then a little galling to find an article in The Times in August 2020 — August is the height of the silly season in national journalism — trotting out the lazy claim that I'd bought farming land for tax avoidance reasons. The billionaires, wrote Sir Max Hastings, a well-known military historian, who merely speculate with the countryside, should stick to oil futures and vacuum cleaners. I wrote to the paper saying that I found this insulting to the 169 intelligent and dedicated people I employ on my farms. These people are completely dedicated to advancing the state-of-the-art of their profession and should be celebrated for the huge progress they're making. I wrote about the initiatives we've been taking and the ways in which we're working hard to change English farming for the better for consumers, the countryside and farmers themselves. If this is tax avoidance, I wrote, why would I bother with all of this? There would be far easier ways. I happen to pay a very large amount of tax to the British Exchequer, but the point is that I would have to be seriously mad to go to all the bother of creating a hugely expensive and productive new commercial adventure to employ so many people. To his credit, John Witherow, the editor of The Times, sent Alice Thompson, a feature writer, to see what we're doing, and the result was a lively and accurate picture of Dyson farming. Dyson farming has grown very quickly to become one of the biggest such operations in the country. We haven't wanted to be big for the sake of it, but to benefit from certain economies of scale, although perhaps, not so very deep down, the romantic in me wants to save, protect and nurture as much English farmland as possible. Scale comes with both increasing possibilities and responsibilities. I had no intention, for example, of becoming a landlord. In fact, when we began to buy farms, I really wanted land with no residential property. Now, though, we own some 300 properties on the farms, of which 180 are homes to rent. Restored barns, or other brick and flint buildings around redundant farmyards, each one has been renovated to a high standard. I remember with fondness the flint, brick and pan-tiled farm buildings in North Norfolk. The farm buildings in Lincolnshire are similar, and it is delightful to be able to restore them and turn them into homes for families in our old farmyards. On our Lincolnshire farms, we've built 2 anaerobic digester power plants. These produce biogas, methane mostly, from maize, other crops and waste products from the farms, that feed Austrian-built GEC Jenbacher 1500 horsepower engines. In turn, these generate heat, which we use to dry grain and heat glasshouses, and electricity, which we feed into the national grid. These engines run around the clock, though they need constant nursing and regular servicing. The anaerobic digesters also produce organic fertilizer for the farms. Combined with run-off water from our yards, excess heat and gas from the digester on the Carrington estate is used to grow strawberries out of season in our big new greenhouse and to dry grain in our grain stores. Built by Dutch contractors, the greenhouse's filigree structure resembles a lightweight contemporary version of Joseph Paxton's Crystal Palace. It's been designed to produce 750 tons of strawberries a year from 700,000 strawberry plants. What this means is that there is now less need for retailers to buy strawberries picked abroad in winter and to fly those thousands of miles to reach British homes, restaurants and hotels. At Dyson, we're trying at every turn to touch the ground lightly in everything we do, to make more from less, and to create a circular system of production through which we aim to recycle everything we use, whether in our farms or our factories. Of course, there's a long way to go. For all our research into vision systems and robotics, Dyson farms for now need skilled manual labour to sort potatoes and select strawberries. Human eyes and hands are to date quicker at spotting unripe strawberries or green potatoes than machines. As to the big question of what our farms can teach the rest of Dyson operations, one answer is the possibility of new materials for the millions of products we make every year. Our scientists and research engineers are working hard on long-term solutions. At least one answer lies in the soil. This is cornstarch, although cornstarch comes from plants grown in soil rather than from the soil itself. For a number of years now, it's been possible to extract polylactic acid, PLA, from cornstarch. We are currently producing it from sugar beet. This is a carbon-neutral and biodegradable alternative to petroleum-based plastics. The idea of being able to grow organic plastics on farms sounds very exciting. These, though, are early days. While PLA is used to make an increasing number of what are known as commodity plastics for food containers, packaging and even tea bags, as well as for 3D printing, it is not suitable for engineering plastics used in the manufacture of, for example, vacuum cleaners and hairdryers. What I can say is that if you came back to see what Dyson's up to in 5, 10, 20 or 100 years from now, whether with our products or through our farms, things will be very different indeed. It's all tremendously exciting, and we should have cause for optimism. Equally, I do have reservations about how some of the things are being done now. It seems to me that there is a question about whether the production of energy trumps the production of food. How much of our effort and investment, for example, should go into the production of electricity? On the one hand, it's satisfying to think that we can generate bioelectricity. On the other, it's questionable as to whether we should be growing maize to feed anaerobic digesters rather than using land to grow crops to feed people. Although, that said, we are making good use of the heat and waste byproducts. And of course, I have my own particular likes and dislikes. I happen to hate wind turbines. They disfigure the landscape, kill birds and massacre insects too. But vast wind farms off the Lincolnshire coast are connected to the national grid, underneath tracts of compulsorily purchased land from our farms, and there's nothing we can do about it. I feel the same about solar panels. You see them disfiguring buildings and stretch across fields that would be better used to grow food. I'm mystified, too, by the fashionable argument that the English countryside should be turned into a kind of outdoor rural leisure centre, for people to wander around and soak up nature, and with wildflowers replacing crops. Who is going to maintain millions of acres for this purpose? Surely the challenge of feeding our own people with our own foods is of prime importance. It's like the argument that Britain doesn't need or want to manufacture. We do make really good food in this country when we choose to, but not on a scale large enough to stop us importing huge, and what should be unnecessary quantities, of staple foods, let alone exotic fruit and vegetables, from around the world. And why should we expect people to grow food for us in poor countries when they should be growing it for themselves, especially where water is scarce or where export of food drives deforestation? There is, of course, the argument that British people neither want to work in factories nor on the land. This, though, is where invention, innovation and technology can really help us. We will rely increasingly on digital and robotic technology to farm for us. But we can and will do this while being in tune with nature and learning from it. I simply can't bear to think of English agriculture going the same way as British manufacturing.
Postscript by Deirdre Dyson. James and I were on the same foundation course and used to bump into one another on the tube sometimes. After a while we'd say, "Second carriage down." There were no romantic vibes, but we enjoyed chatting and joined up with 2 other students at lunchtimes. My art training had been hard-won, and I had no intention of becoming involved with anyone at the time. I worked all hours. It came as a complete shock when James started holding my hand during a drawing study day at London Zoo. The dilemma for me was, I can't take my hand away as I might upset my new friend. Even travelling back to the studio, he still had my hand, and by this time I thought I would just have to see how things played out. We were engaged by the end of the year. James and I are very different, but also have many things in common. The attraction for me, apart from his beautiful blue eyes and his kindness, was James's extraordinary confidence. He was totally at ease with his plunge into art college and the uncertainty of the canvas before us. He was also totally at ease with difficult projects, which I would try to analyse to find the reason why we were asked to do them and what we were supposed to learn from them. He was just as serious as me, but keen to get on with whatever the project was and to see what developed. James always had an opinion about anything and everything, and was clever at persuading others to agree with him. He liked and still likes arguing, even if he secretly agreed with the opposing view. He was taught to do this at school. I found this rather confusing at first, but admired his engaging enthusiasm that really convinced people. This proved to be a valuable gift in the years ahead. In our second year, I was given a scholarship to stay at the Byam Shore, and James had been accepted at the RCA. We moved in together. One grant went on rent, and we both lived off the other. Neither of us had cushy upbringings, so the challenge of how to survive financially has always been with us. I believe this is the best grounding for any future success. We had nothing to lose. We both had enough skills to get work in the holidays, so we knew that we would be able to get through life with ordinary jobs if the art world didn't work out for us. I moved on to Wimbledon College of Art for my 3-year diploma course. We were married during our second year, and we both finished our training at the same time. I had started to gain some private graphic work, as James was offered the Rotork position in Bath. But before finding new commissions in a new town, we planned to squeeze in a family. We arrived in Bath with a 6-week-old baby, Emily. Looking back, this also was a huge risk. During the Rotork boat period, James learned how to design, produce and sell. But, and this is another character trait, he likes and needs to be in control, and his ball barrow idea was the perfect project to allow him to break away on his own. With James running his own start-up, we felt quite comfortable for a short while and even moved house, as by then we had 2 children and a baby. I was somehow managing to paint small canvases and selling some, plus doing some graphic design work for a hotel and illustrations for a book. However, we were let down badly by the shareholders, shafted is the truth, of the Ball Barrow Company, and suddenly we were back to square one with a mortgage, 2 children and a tiny baby. We are both practical people and would do everything ourselves if we could. For our new home, James hired a digger and drove it himself to create a swimming pool. We made a fish pond together and a vegetable garden in a half-acre patch. This took up most weekends. It was also, sadly, the first thing to go following the Ball Barrow crisis. We managed to sell our half-acre with planning permission. I was terribly hurt by this whole disaster, especially as James had been working 7 days a week, had built a production team of 30 people, and had recently added other new designs to the product line, which the shareholders had decided should all be signed over to the company. This meant that James no longer owned his own designs. I felt powerless to help, but soon started an evening class teaching art, which brought in a little money. I also had a monthly trip to London to illustrate a column for Vogue. We went, though, through a period of what felt like grief and chewing it all over day and night, until James said, "Enough, I'm going to develop the vacuum cleaner." He'd already dreamed of this cyclonic idea and presented it to the shareholders. They were not interested. I am never going to have shareholders, and I am never signing my designs over to anyone again. Lesson learned. We were helped enormously through this difficult time by close friends who remain our closest friends today. I was brought up to have a very strong moral compass, so the Baldbarrow event really shocked me. Over the years, we've had various employees who've had their own little businesses running on the back of the main one, or who have left the company and taken secrets with them. The bigger the business, the more of these incidents, and it is something I cannot grow immune to. I just believe in right and wrong. When James first set up the Baldbarrow Company, I remember saying how important it is to be squeaky clean in all dealings. This is why I've always supported James with his legal battles, in particular the US lawsuit over the vacuum cleaner, which lasted 5 years. I could not let this happen to him twice, as it would have been truly soul-destroying. So I tried to encourage him to keep on trying to overcome this wrong in spite of the alarming leakage of funds for legal fees. The following 5 years were ones of perpetual trial and error, yet stubborn determination carried James through the early development of the vacuum cleaner. Not only does he never give up, but he always does everything properly and pays attention to every last detail. Nothing less will do. I am stubborn and determined too, but I could never have persevered to the extent James did. James is extremely competitive with work and life in general. This is a really important characteristic in the world of trading, and competitively his field is ruthless. I steer well away from possible conflict. I do the crossword secretly every day because if he sees me doing it, he immediately begins too and tries to complete it first. He never allowed the children to beat him at tennis, which induced tears and frustrations. I'm not sure how they feel about this now, but I think it was a result of being the youngest of 3 and having to fight his corner alone at school. James is still working flat out, but is happy to be in control. Although we now have the wonderful support of talented advisors, business, financial and legal. His need for control is reflected in his organisational abilities and his everyday tidiness. I keep the door of my untidy studio firmly shut. James avoids giving advice because it may be the wrong advice. We both believe that people need encouragement, especially young people making their way in the world. They also need the opportunities to succeed. And this is why, like James, I'm so concerned with education. Education gave us both the chance to find out what we were good at and to do well. Thousands of children never discover their talents. The waste fills me with horror. Creativity really matters. I'm really excited to see the Dyson Institute flourishing, with young people both studying and working creatively, debt-free too. They're prepared for a world of adventurous and creative work. I'm particularly excited at the way in which Dyson undergraduates are being educated academically and practically at the same time to an exceptionally high standard and without incurring fees. I am passionate about the lack of respect for talent and skills in school education, which is the core of all creativity and problem-solving in products. I could never have imagined that the journey would take us where we are today. Although our children have their own careers and are creative people themselves, Dyson has become part of all our lives. A friendly monster, it's a family business, so we all attend meetings and keep up with the progress in all areas. I'm on the foundation team, which has grown enormously over the years, helping schools across the world with design and technology education and sponsoring the James Dyson Award. Some major projects have been brought to me first, as some people are afraid to approach James directly. I've been able to follow my own path while riding this roller coaster. Right at the beginning of our journey together, James said, "It doesn't matter how hard it gets, as long as we get through it together." Words I've never forgotten.